There we go. I had that muted and everything. I'm only a little late because I was looking at some things. I don't know. But here we are for the last time. A new book poll will be put up tonight. Grumble! I don't even know. I just saw my mic turn red, so it may have cut off. I don't know. Anyway, new book. was the yeah. Anyway, this is the last one for this book. And the new poll will go up in a couple of hours. Where is what? hey, hey, Rev, are you streaming tonight? Which, What's stuffing your face first? Well, good. You need them energies. Does booze fix it or no? Accurate. He earned that title last night, man. He had maniacal laughter and everything. He's getting up. He's coming over. Oh no! Don't hurt me, Rift. Don't hurt me. I just gave you a title of honor. That's all I can say. He says, what? It's an honor. You know who else is unhinged? Majima. It's an honor. He doesn't believe. I mean, fine. But I just spent the afternoon drawing Katsuo, who is also mildly unhinged. So, you know? How could I do this to him? Give him an honor? You're welcome. Unhinged to Twitch commands. So, what does it do? Anyways, sorry guys. Also, this. Also, the reason we're gathered here today is for the sourdough. Our name is Mona. We are 14 years old. We are gifted with magically influencing baked goods. Do you think that she could make baked goods? Decide tell them to ferment enough that they become hallucinogens. Do you think that she can make baked goods become baked goods? Anyway, from cook to staling to animation, people in this kingdom don't like magickers. That's us. Our parents are dead. Our aunt and uncle own a bakery. We found a dead girl in the bakery one night. Hashtag that's not a body, that's a dragon fruit. She had odd socks on, kind of sad that she died that way. Hashtag crying. The Popo came and wanted to accuse us of murder. Super powerful magicker and Duchess of Kingdom found us not guilty. Had to walk home. Which should be answered. I agree. Imagine if instead of telling that bread the dude was swallowing to get super stale, she was like, get him super high. And then he just started having a bad trip because he just had too much. Molly, who reanimates dead horses, is considered crazy and warned us about magickers being killed. You know, the fact that she is so specifically unique and she's only been in like one scene is kind of crazy. Return home, be attacked by younger brother of dead girl. He still thinks she's alive. We have a gingerbread man friend who is now a week stale, but that just means that he's a week stable. Also, we have Bob the carnivorous sourdough starter in the basement, so we're worried about being murdered and other magickers are fleeing. So we did not flee the city, and the green man came after us. Hashtag avoided murder. He hid away in the bell, or we hid away in the bell tower for a couple of weeks. Hashtag Auntie knows nothing. We avoid the cops a couple of times. We see a bunch of posters around town, some of which look blatantly like a coup plot. The Duchess doesn't know it is happening because she never leaves the house. Hashtag homebody gonna homebody. Hashtag all constables are part of a coup. Technically not. There were only 6 of them that were part of a coup, but apparently none of them told the Duchess what was going on. Hey Ruth, welcome. We get together the plan to tell the Duchess about the plot, but first we must climb the poop chute. Yes, hashtag yes, I'm serious. Hashtag there was a lot of toilet references in this, bro. Hashtag everything smells bad. Tell the Duchess about the traitor and the green man. Duchess believes us, arrests the Green Man, and exiles the traitor despite his threats to overthrow. Guess what not killing the traitor ends up doing? Oh, right. He went straight into the hands of the cannibal mercs and is still planning to overthrow the town while the entire military of 2,000 men is away because why would you leave any defense at home ever, LMFAO? I hope that sounded as uh caps locked as it is written. So the whole place is going to be under attack in 2 days because the army is 5 days away. Mona is brought to the palace to help create defenses because she is the only magician in this place. She is preparing to make a giant gingerbread man, possibly an army. She also wants to throw jars of Bob on every invader so he can eat their faces. Hashtag what is the consciousness of the multi-Bob verse? Oh yeah, do you have any ideas on that, Rev? So if Bob is split into multiple buckets, does he gain multi-consciousness and are all those consciousnesses connected to the same like sourdough mainframe? Or are they all individual creatures? All connected to the elder brain? Okay, that makes sense. See, I was kind of hoping that she would just dig a moat around this entire direction and then feed Bob until Bob became this giant blob of sourdough that filled the moat, and then giant sourdough bread tentacles would come flying out of the moat and just like suck them into his multi-mouth. Right now you're sitting outside, it's so pretty. Nice. Sourdough moat actually would have been. It's what I figured she was gonna do, and then she went with jars. And tomorrow we live or die smelling of baked bread. So that is our synopsis. I'm gonna get Tate another in case he wants this. You guys have no idea. This kid, take it. He is so picky about like the chews that he wants, and he'll have like obsessive moments where he cannot get enough. Like previously with esophaguses, he would just now he doesn't really touch them, and then they'll sit around for a couple of weeks until he finally decides he wants to eat it, and then just but he gets bored of chew things very easily and doesn't take most of them. They're the one rawhides at the store that are like covered in sweet potato and then have like chicken roll on the inside, and he will only eat off the sweet potato. Then he just leaves the rawhide. He doesn't even care about the chicken inside. Anyway, then you give him something that is like, this is for hard chewers. It should last them 5 hours. And it's like 30 minutes later and it's gone. Why did you shrink my book to this unmanageable size? Why did you erase the words from my book? Sorry. Calibre. I know it's caliber, but ever since I first saw it, I've always said calibre, and so now it's just like nice. That's gonna be pretty. Vanya, you're at work. I hope you have a good day at work. Yeah, Tate gets kind of aggressive. I have to be careful about how I approach him, and if he's being a little meany. Thank you. All right. Sorry. I'm too busy watching, discussing the chat. We're gonna get into this now. Sorry, I saw I had Rev's Twitch open. I was like, wait a second. She already streaming? Sorry. I spent most of the day making a whole lot more of Bob. Dough kept arriving from every bakery in the city, wagons full of barrels oozing with dough, vats full of dough, horse troughs and pots and buckets of dough. The palace servants stacked it up around the edge of the courtyard. I stopped in my tracks. We have a rule against this. Just starts watching Twitch, right? I mean, I do have Greenies open and Sir Ithusa's open, so we'll never outlive this phrase. Yeah, you do got to go find Greenie. She's streaming right now. When I saw a coffin lit off, dough creeping over the sides, it was a plain pine box, nothing fancy, but it was still unmistakably a coffin. Where did that come from? Church of Sorrowful Angels, said the wagon drover, helping one of the footmen wrestle the coffin off of the wagon bed. They ran out of They ran out of rain barrels. They say it ain't never been used if you're worried. If we survive this, I was going to have to go find the Church of Sorrowful Angels and talk to their cook. Still, that was a lot of dough. I could probably make half a golem out of that much dough. But I was talking about making more bob. Generally, you have to be careful when you add water and flour to a sourdough starter to make sure that you've got the right proportions and all. But in Bob's case, it was easy. I stuck both hands into the soup tureen and tried to convince him that what the world needed was a whole lot more Bob. As this coincided with what Bob himself had always believed, pretty soon I had commandeered a horse trough and had footmen dumping 50-pound sack of flour into it. I threw it I threw in a couple of dead fish when no one was looking. By mid-afternoon, Bob filled 6 rain barrels, and here I found an example of what spiraling shadows call the magic of sympathy. Despite the fact that they were in separate barrels, they were all still Bob. If I shoved an arm into a barrel and told Bob that he was good and wonderful sourdough starter, the best starter in the whole world, all 6 barrels glubbed and belched happily. When I tried to explain about the Carricks, that there were mean people in the world who wanted to hurt me and Aunt Tabitha and take away Bob's flour and dead fish, all 6 barrels hissed and globbed and floury tentacles lashed into the air. That's not creepy at all, said Spindle, turning up at my elbow. What have you got there? It's only Bob. Well, a lot of Bob. Don't touch him. I rubbed the back of my neck wearily. Where have you been all day? Spindle shrugged. Out, about, you know, which meant that he didn't want to talk about it. I gave him a mildly curious look and he flushed. Was looking for knackering Molly, if you gotta know. Oh, I've been so busy I hadn't thought about her. Is she okay? She's fine, but she won't come help. He folded his arms tight and glared down at his shoes. Says that it's not for little people like her. Says she'll get crushed. I told her that we needed her, that there weren't no there weren't no more wizards but you, but she wouldn't listen. I was disappointed, but I tried not to show it. I think the last war was really hard on her. She went with the army once. They say that's when she went crazy. Just 'cause you're crazy don't mean that you can't help, said Spindle, scuffing the ground with his foot. I remembered Uncle Albert saying if you slap a medal on someone, you don't have to ask questions or fix what went wrong. Had they given Molly a medal for asking the dead horses to walk on the battlefield? It was too much, and I was 14 years old, and if I didn't get back to work, it wouldn't matter how heroes were made and whether that was good or bad or indifferent. I socked Spindle on the arm. Come and help me get Bob into jars. I'll tell him you're a friend. It took over 100 jars to contain Bob. I think we used the entire stock from the palace. We had pickled beets and pickled eggs and pickled beef and pickled asparagus for lunch and dinner to free up the jars, and if I didn't want to see and by the end, I didn't want to see another pickle ever again. The job was made more difficult because Bob was fighting mad now. I think Spindle dumped a couple of jars of pickled chili peppers into barrels when I wasn't looking and was striking out at strangers, so Spindle and Aunt Tabitha and I were the only ones who could get him into the jars. Jenny, the kitchen maid, was really helpful. She kept finding jars tucked into corners and bringing them out, which was more than the head cook had done. On her, said Jenny, sniffing. She went off to the flea market in her ear after your aunt told her off. Don't tell her that I brought you the pickled radishes, though. Those are her specialty, you know. She'd be right mad if she knew that they were stuffing dough into those jars. I was, ah, I was latching. I just pushed a bunch of buttons. I was latching the very last lid onto the very last jar when Joshua appeared at my elbow. It was early evening. The sky looked old and bloody over the western walls. Mona, he said, they're finishing the oven now. I said, not looking at him. Another hour to get it evenly heated and we'll start baking. He nodded. In that case, something landed on my shoulder. I let out a squawk and ducked down, and my gingerbread man climbed on top of my head and started waving his arms angrily at my attacker. Joshua, who should have been helping, started laughing instead. It was a pigeon. This was a big, glossy gray bird with a subtle, oily iridescence along his neck feathers, but still a pigeon. You get them everywhere in town. The pigeon puffed out its chest and looked down its beak at me, which is not the sort of behavior you expect from a bird that lives in gutters. Joshua finally managed to stop laughing and said, I think that's one of Annalise's. See if it's got a message. A message? I stared at the bird, who was uncomfortably close to my face. The pigeon lifted one foot and it had a little capsule strapped to its leg. Using its beak, it removed the capsule and held it out to me. Joshua, the bird is giving me something. Bob is going to consume people. My potential is being recognized. Why doesn't Bob turn into a friggin' why does Bob need to be contained? Just send him out into the world as a giant glob of moving carnivorous sourdough. It's a messenger pigeon, said Joshua. Annalise, she's a wizard, travels with the army. She does homing pigeons. Unfortunately, while she can send them here, we can't send them back to her. They're strict one-way birds. They can find their way home, and that's it. Still, she can usually magic them into finding a specific person. Shouldn't it she be trying to find you, then, or the Duchess? She got one of a few hours ago, said Joshua, the laughter fading from his voice. They got our message. The army is a little more than 3 days away. They're doing a forced march and hope to cut it down, but even an army can't run all the way here. Well, I hadn't had much hope. It felt less like a fist in the gut and more like a confirmation of what I had known all along. The army couldn't save us. The Golden General couldn't save us. It was up to us. The bird shook the message capsule at me. I took it gingerly between my fingers, expecting a peck. There was a note inside. It was written neatly on a sheet of onion skin paper, folded so tightly that an entire sheet could fit into the tiny capsule. I smoothed it out and read, Timona, the wizard of the bakery, greetings from General Ethan. Ah, of course. The Golden General was sending me letters now. Naturally, this was the next logical step. After this, Our Lady of Sorrowful Angels would step down off of her church spire and roll up her sleeves and begin punching dough alongside Aunt Tabitha. From Ethan? Said Joshua. I nodded. How did he know who I was? The Duchess sent a very thorough report with the riders, and you're one of the wizards at our disposal. I can't imagine there are too many wizard girls running around the palace right now. Joshua laughed warily. Would that would that there were. Would that there were? He is being contained in a multiverse of jars. Also, please save some Bob. Do you think that Bob is going to be wiped out? A few more like you, and we might not need the army. Ha ha, I said, smoothing the creases out of the letter and reading further down. Her Grace the Duchess informs me that in our city's hour of need, you have stepped forward. You have all my gratitude, Wizard Mona. I implore you, leave no stone unturned in your efforts to save our city. Do not be bound by what seems foolish or impossible. In magic, creativity is as important as knowledge. The greatest wizards I have ever known would have been considered a minor talent by our standards, but he was relentless in finding ways to make things work with what he had. I hope that you will be the same. We will be with you as soon as we can. Yours, General Ethan. Its job done, the pigeon launched itself heavily off my shoulder and circled the courtyard, gaining altitude. It vanished over the top of the palace, presumably to some hidden dovecote where the homing pigeons roasted. They're gonna have them for dinner too. I folded the note and shoved it into my pocket. I hadn't expected a letter from the Golden General in the first place, so it was stupid to feel disappointed that when one arrived, it didn't include handy advice like, by the way, I've hidden a magic super wagon in the third broom closet on the left. Still, a super weapon would have been nice. You might think that having the Golden General watching over your shoulder, even by homing pigeon, would be daunting, but really, when everybody was going to die if I failed, piling, and the great hero of our army will be very disappointed on top of that didn't mean much. In a way, the letter was actually encouraging. In magic, creativity is as important as knowledge. If anybody knew, it was the Golden General. He was a wizard after all, and a very well trained one. If he said that you could do a lot with a little magic, well, you couldn't argue that my bread golems weren't creative. I just had to think of even more creative things to do. We're beginning the heating now, called the blacksmith as the first load of charcoal went into the oven. You can be spared for an hour then, said Joshua as I turned away from the ovens. Come with me. The carracks have reached the outlying areas. You have a pet pigeon and they're amazing. Don't don't roast the pigeons. We're not gonna roast the pigeons. I just misread that. Okay. Okay. Joshua and the Duchess and I stood on the wall over the great gate of the city and looked over the army of Carrick's mercenaries. Oh, it was grim. Oh yeah, I have to tell you guys. Who has a pet pigeon? Oh, Grumble. Grumble has a pet pigeon. Grumble also has bunnies. Uh, but for everybody in the chat, we are watching the Cable Guy tomorrow. I just wanted to let you know. There's details on the server for when. Yeah. They would have reached us by nightfall if they wanted to. All they had to do was keep marching past the outlying farms, but instead they paused at every one and set the fields to torch. The daylight was fading, but burning wheat made thin, bright lines that winked out one by one as the farms burned to ash. I wiped my face. I was so angry I was crying. Spindle stood next to me, his arms on the blocky stones of the battlements, and his face was the same as when he found Tibby's bracelet in the bakery. The gingerbread man hid his face in my hair. There was no point to it. That was the infuriating thing. Sure, the Carricks were going to try and kill us because they wanted our city, and that was pretty awful, but at least they could. You could see why they were doing it. Burning the farms was just senseless destruction. We weren't going to get any supplies past their armies, so it wasn't like they were burning crops to keep us from getting them. They were pulling the wings off of a fly because they could. The people were evacuated this morning, said the Duchess. The animals, too. Every park in the city is crammed full of pigs and chickens and cows and farmers yelling at each other. She sighed. At least we won't lose many lives to this. But great good gods, what a waste. The army was close. You could just make out individuals in ragged lines marching towards us. There were a lot of them. Don't ask me how many there were. I can estimate a cup of flour or a tablespoon of baking powder, but armies aren't ingredients. There were a lot, compared to the pitiful number of men I had seen drilling earlier. So, we're doomed, my gut said conversationally. Yup, said my brain. So long as we're clear. The great gate was closed, of course. All of the gates in the walls of the city were closed and barred with iron portcullis. But the city didn't exactly stop there. The problem with having a walled city is that it limits how big you can get. The current walls were actually the third or fourth set of walls around the city in concentric rings like an onion. Unfortunately, previous generations had cannibalized those earlier walls for their building materials. So, if we didn't hold them to the gate, we didn't have much of a way to fall back to much of a fallback position. Outside the walls, however, it's not a sharp transition with city on one side and country on the other. There's a whole town of sorts outside the gates. People driving their goods to the city to sell all hot and thirsty by the time they arrive. So somebody sets up a food and a drink stand outside to meet them, and over time, the stand becomes a bona fide inn, and then somebody else sets up another food stand, and so on and so forth. Some people can't afford to live in town, and rather than set up a place like Rat's Elbow, they opt to live just outside the city walls. And there are a whole lot of businesses that you really don't want inside the city, like knackers and the tanners. The smell associated with leather making will make your nose try to crawl off your head, probably because they used pee to make, like tanners used to use urine for what they was doing. I looked this up like a couple weeks ago, actually. There's an old saying that has to do with that. It was like, oh, not even a pot to piss in. I think that's what it was. I was like listening to something and they were talking where phrases came from, or not even a bottle to piss in or something, because people would be so poor that they would sell their pee to the tanners. And so if you were like, well, you don't even have a bottle to pee in, so you can sell it to the tanners, you were super poor. Are you thinking of buying your pigeon a GF? And of course, the knackers and the tanners need some place to live and somebody to set another food stand up and to sell to them, although most of them burned out their sinuses long ago and can't taste a thing. And you get the idea. We have half a mile worth of town along all of the major roads into the city before you get into the walls at all. I expected the Carricks to burn that, too, but they didn't. Joshua shook his head when I asked. The fire will spread too quickly, he said. They have to camp there, and there is too much of a chance that the whole place will go up like a tinderbox. If they're fighting fires, they're not fighting us. He put a hand on his sword hilt. They know that there will probably still be people in there. There are always people who won't listen to the evacuations orders, but even if we had a dozen trained assassins hiding in the knacker yard, they still lose a fewer people than if they turned the whole place into an inferno. Fullers did similar, stomping on urine-soaked fabrics to get it whiter. The ingenuity. "Do we have a dozen trained assassins?" I asked hopefully. The spring green man had definitely soured me on the notion of assassins, but I was totally willing to change my mind. "No," said Joshua. Spindle coughed. We all looked at him, and he stared up into the sky with his hands behind his back and said, "Well, not assassins exactly." "Spindle," said the Duchess, with wary amusement, "what do you know that we don't?" Couple of guys out the ras nets, you know. We ain't like an army, but this is our city too. He scratched his chin. Heard a couple of 'em went out of the smugglers' tunnels. Slug wouldn't go, and One-Eyed Benji and Leaky Peg did, and most of the crack hands bully boys. The names of these people amaze me, murmured the Duchess. Really, the nobles are so unimaginative by comparison. I wonder if Leaky Peg would like a cabinet position. Dunno how much good it'll do having them out there, but can't hurt, Spindle finished. Hot Roast is almost as good a name as Car Wash. I love the name Car Wash. Polar white was an expression meant bright white. Words are so interesting. Oh yeah, Dragon, do you not know? Vanya has a cat that she adopted named Car Wash. "It may help a great deal," said Joshua. "Taking out a few individual fighters won't make much of a difference, but if they can make the Carracks agitated and jumping at shadows, I'd far rather face an army that didn't get a good night's sleep. If you get a chance, Spindle," said the Duchess, "please extend the thanks to the crown to one-eyed extend the thanks of the crown to One-Eyed Benji and Crackhand and, well, everyone. I doubt they'd like public recognition." "They're stopping," said Joshua, leaning over the battlements. He was right. They had halted a few hundred yards from the gate. We could hear them in the distance, a hum of voices and jeers and laughter, not unlike the sounds of the city itself. "Can't we do something?" I asked. "They're sitting right there." Joshua shook his head. "Out of the arrow range. They know exactly what they're about. They'll set up camp, and Oberon must have told them that we don't have the resources to lead a charge against them." We stood in the battlements while the sun went down behind the enemy. Rising smoke from the burning fields made black columns against the sunset. I turned away. I felt ancient, like I'd aged a lifetime standing there. The Mona who had spent the afternoon putting jar lids onto sourdough starters, seemed distant and young and innocent, and the Mona who had found a dead girl on the bakery floor was some other person from somebody else's life entirely. It's a strange way to feel when you're 14. "I need to get back to the ovens," I said. "I have a few more ideas, but we don't have very much time." You know, Marcella probably also feels like her life is not her own at some point. Grumble is the pigeon. Grumbles the pigeon lady is named Balfory. Butterball. Hey, Vanya is listening. She's here in spirit. When I got back to the palace kitchens, the blacksmiths weren't ready yet. Argonel was overseeing one of the shields full of hot coals, which hadn't been attached properly and had spilled down over the cookie sheets. "Sorry, Wizard Mona," he said, waving an apprentice into position. "I threatened to have the man responsible horsewhipped, but I fear that it was me. We'll have it up in an hour or less." "It's all right," I said absently, reaching to pat his arm. His bicep was bigger than my head. "There's something that I need to do first. I'd rather face an army that didn't get a good night's sleep." I was nearly at the kitchen door when Harold the guard stepped out and pulled me aside. "Wizard Mona." I was pretty sure that I was going to get really tired of being called Wizard Mona before this was over. "Yes?" He shifted his feet and said, "Mona, Wizard Elgar's escaped." My head was full of carracks and burning fields, and I started to say who, and then the bottom dropped out of my stomach, which was talking about because he was talking about the spring green man. "Escaped?" I said faintly. Harold nodded. "He may have had an ally on the inside. We haven't had time to smoke out all of Oberon's people yet. He shouldn't have been able to escape from a wizard's prison by himself, but we've been so short-handed that we haven't been checking the cells as regularly as we should. And, well, he's gone." My stomach seemed to be laying somewhere on the ground several feet away. On the other side of the courtyard, the apprentices yelled, "Huh!" and the shield of coal swung clanking on the chains. There was a hiss as coals splashed over the sides and somebody cursed. It would be very foolish of him to come after you, said Harold earnestly, putting a hand on my shoulder. He'll probably go over the walls and try to meet with Oberon. It would be suicide to try to get to you now. He's not right, I said, remembering that voice giggling in the dark in the cellar under the bakery. It wasn't that Elgar was mad. Knackering Molly was mad, and she'd never do anything like that. There was something else wrong with him, some kind of terrible darkness. I don't know if he'll care that it's suicide. Harold didn't argue. I'll be guarding you. You won't be left unattended for a minute. If he does attack, that should buy you time to do something magical in your own defense. I nearly laughed or cried or both. Magical in my own defense? What was I going to do? Bake an attack scone at him? Unless Harold managed to buy me 2 hours in an oven on medium heat, there wasn't a lot that I could do without prep work. Do you think that she can like manipulate just flour? Or what if she just puts flour and water together and nothing else? What if she just did beer and flour? Could she manipulate that, or does it have to be like baked? It's not. No, because she talks to the dough, the uncooked dough, so it doesn't have to be baked. I didn't say any of it. But see, if she can talk to the sourdough starter and get the sourdough starter to do stuff, then she should be able to make like flour and water paste and then like tell it to harden or something. So then it turns into basically a clay knife or a clay shield. I didn't say any of it. It didn't matter if 100 spring green mans were after me. There were still thousands of carricks outside this. Thousands of carricks? Thousands? What do they expect their own only 2,000 person army to do against literal thousands of merc cannibals? It feels like there should be many less than thousands. I assume that she is just exaggerating the amount of them there are. I could do nothing. They only have 100 jars. I can do nothing about Elgar right now. I might be able to do something about the Carricks. In magic, creativity is as important as knowledge. Fine, I said to Harold. Come with me. Aunt Tabitha, I said, stepping into the kitchen, I need to make gingerbread, and I need a bunch of cookie sheets. These were probably going to be the worst gingerbread men ever. You're supposed to let the dough rest for a couple of hours before you bake it, and I didn't have time. But that was okay because the worst gingerbread ever is exactly what I want to make. What if these worst gingerbread ever just like came out of the oven like little pirates and like some of them just had eye patches? Aunt Tabitha helped me bash the dough together. It was a big batch, double what we make when we would do cooking in the bakery, and it makes 40 or 50 cookies by itself. Spindle hunched up next to the fireplace, watching the gingerbread man stood on the mantel and glared suspiciously down at the batch of dough I was making. Jenny ran back and forth, bringing spoons and flour and towels and anything else we needed. Harold stood by the door and looked so tough and professional and guardy that I wanted to cry. Cayenne and gingerbread? Asked Aunt Tabitha mildly. Mona, are you sure? I'd add broken glass if I didn't think that it would hurt my hands, I said, dumping most of the cayenne in and looking around for something worse. Have you got any rat poison? Oh my gosh, imagine they come out as a chain gang. Jenny found it, a big jar full of dusty looking granules. She brought in the jar, looking proud and worried. Aunt Tabitha ran her hands over her face and said, Mona, nobody is going to eat them, I said. I hope. I need them to be bad. I remembered the rat poison. I dumped the rat poison into the mixing bowl. You know what you're doing, I suppose, said Aunt Tabitha, adding poison to her own batch. Not really, I said, and was surprised to find that I was smiling. But we'll find out. The dough under my hands was bad. I could feel it. There was malice in it. It wanted to hurt people. I I fed that as much as I could, pouring in all of my anger at the sight of the burning fields into it. and all of my terror at the news that the spring green man had escaped. By the time I was done, I wouldn't have had to worry about rat poison. The dough would try to choke you before you even managed to swallow it. I didn't like doing this. The thing about baking is that you're feeding people and it's nice. You make things that taste good and that make people happy to eat them. The very best thing about being a baker is watching somebody bite into a blueberry muffin or a fresh slice of sourdough dripping with butter and seeing them close their eyes and savor the taste. You're making their lives better, just a tiny bit. It is nearly impossible to be sad when eating a blueberry muffin. I'm pretty sure that's a scientific fact. Making cookies that were bad and horrible and that no sane person would eat was, well, it was like being an anti-baker. It was the opposite of what I was supposed to do. I gritted my teeth and remembered the lines of burning wheat. Aunt Tabitha helped me slap out the big ball of dough of each cookie sheet and helped to roll it out flat. But I was the one who cut each gingerbread shape. I didn't have a cookie cutter, so they were kind of irregular, but they had 2 arms and 2 legs each, and that's what wasn't the important thing. They were also really big for gingerbread men. It was one to a cookie sheet, about a foot wide and 18 inches tall. We ended up with 23. We slid them into the oven. The big palace ovens were perfect for this because you could fit 23 cookie sheets inside without a problem. I took the scraps left over from cutting the cookies and threw them into the back into the mixing bowl. If the book was right, the dough should be linked to the cookies, and I was hoping that I could use the magic of sympathy to control the cookies through the dough. Well, that was half of it down. I turned to Spindle. Spindle, for the next part, I need your help. Spindle slid down from the raised brick on the hearth and fired off a mocking salute. At your service, General Mona. Aunt Tabitha picked up the mixing and baking equipment and went off to the scullery to make sure that it got cleaned immediately and nobody sampled rat poisoning by mistake. I leaned against the outside of the fireplace next to Spindle. Look, you know people, right? Those people going out to harass the Carricks tonight? Of course, said Spindle. Ran with some of them back in the day. Not hands boys, but some of the others. Do you know anybody who can take out a load of cookies? I asked, nodding to the ovens. They're going to be bad, and I think that I can make them smart enough to start harassing the Carricks. They aren't fighters exactly, but they'll want to make mischief. Some of the ordinary gingerbread men get a little feisty sometimes. They'll tie your shoelaces together and stuff, but these are going to be much worse. And I thought they could, oh, spook the horses and cut ropes and put rocks in people's beds. What if they all were just suicide missions and they just shoved their faces inside of people's mouths, shoved an arm inside people's mouth, and force fed them rat poison? They're gonna get violent, man. Put pepper and flour in the flour and set fire to bedrolls, steal their daggers and their socks, put out their eyes while they're asleep. Let's not get carried away, Spindle. You ever try to fight without any eyes? No, and neither have you, so don't start. Anyways, I need somebody to take 2 sacks of cookies outside the walls and set 'em loose near the Carrick's camp. Spindle nodded. Right, I'll do it. No, you won't. You could get killed. Can't you find somebody going out there, like Wiggly Bob or whatever their names are, and have them do it? They're all gone already, said Spindle, and I'd take hours to find somebody else and convince them. I know how to get out. I know the way through the knacker yard. They ain't gonna catch me. Spindle, no. He folded his arms over his chest. Look, Mona, I can do this. Let me do this. I ain't a wizard like you, and I ain't a fighter. If the Carricks get through, I ain't gonna be able to do much. But I'm a real good at sneaking around, and I'm not saying that I could pick the sentry's pocket, because I probably can't, and I wouldn't try. But I can get in close enough to set your little things loose. But this is maybe the only thing that I'm gonna do that'll be of any help, so let me do it. I probably should have said no. It was crazy to let him go sneaking around outside of the walls, but he was also right. And this wasn't that much more dangerous than sneaking into the castle, was it? He'd done that 10 times as well as I had. I'd gotten stuck in the toilet. Besides, If he was outside the walls, at least Spindle wouldn't be in the crossfire if the spring green man came for me. All right, I said. You can take them, but be careful. If they kill you, I will never, never, never forgive you. Yeah, yeah. It took me 10 minutes to make up a big batch of icing, and by the time I was done, the cookies were coming out of the oven. Aunt Tabitha emerged from the scullery, and Spindle acquired 2 burlap potato sacks by the simple expedient of dumping potatoes all over the pantry. We had leftover flour sacks, so now we've got potato sacks too. Jenny put her hands to her mouth and giggled. Oh, Cook'll be mad as fire when he sees that. We yoinked cookie sheets from the oven and dropped them on the big wooden table. I hurriedly iced eyes and mouths onto each one. I gave them little fangs. They wouldn't be able to bite with them, but they seemed appropriate. When they were all treated with icing and had cooled a bit, I grabbed a ball of leftover dough and took a deep breath. Okay, cookies, listen up. We've got a job to do. You're going to go out there and make a whole bunch of people miserable. Now get up. And I pushed magic and will into the ball of dough and threw it into the cookies. There was a long, long moment when nothing happened, and I pushed the magic even harder, screwing my face up and, I can't explain it, sort of shoving with the inside of my head. And then one of the gingerbread men sat up, and the kitchen filled with soft ripping sounds as the cookies pulled themselves free of the cookie sheets, sitting up and stretching and looking around. Okay, here's what we're going to do. One of the cookies picked up a mixing spoon and bashed the cookie next to it over the head. The cookie recoiled with a spray of crumbs and threw itself at its attacker, leaving one of its legs behind on the cookie sheet. Apparently, the grease hadn't gone on quite evenly on that one. Stop! I yelled, rushing forward as a one-legged cookie hopped furiously after the spoon-wielding cookie. Stop! Stop! Hey, James, welcome. Happy Friday. How's it going? Other cookies charged into the fray. Some of them went for their neighbors, while others started arming themselves with kitchen utensils. Two formed a temporary alliance and flipped up a cookie sheet as a makeshift barricade. I never know if the cars driving by actually make it through. Oh, Bobby, too. Bobby! Welcome. We are just building an army of gingerbread men right now. The two formed a temporary alliance and flipped up a cookie sheet as a makeshift barricade. Everybody stop! They weren't listening. There was a jar of walnuts at one end of the table, and two cookies behind the barricade broke into it and began pelting everyone indiscriminately with the contents. Spindle dove under the table. Harold drew his sword and waved it vaguely, apparently not sure on whether he should be defending me or running a rogue cookie through. Aunt Tabitha whipped a frying pan around and connected with a cookie that had a whisk in each hand and a homicidal expression on its icing face. This is horrible, I thought, sinking my fingers into a ball of gingerbread scraps. I've completely blown it. What was I thinking? You make evil bread and it's not going to listen just because you ask it nicely. I'll have to pull the magic out of all of them. What a waste of time and energy. Suddenly, there was a loud banging. I looked up. Everybody looked up. My faithful gingerbread man was standing in the center of the table, clanging a spoon against a cookie sheet like a gong. I expected the bad cookies to pelt him with the walnuts and was about to dive to his rescue. He was a quarter of the size, and he was so stale the walnuts might just bounce off. But what if he shattered? Then I realized that all of the other cookies were staring at him. When he was sure that he had everyone's attention, he set the spoon down and waved his arms, stomping back and forth and glaring. It's completely ridiculous, and I still don't quite believe it, but somehow he communicated with the other cookies. Don't get me wrong, Dough's not smart. It's not like they talked philosophy and spoke a language called cookies. Nevertheless, my gingerbread man somehow managed to convey something for a minute or two, while the bad cookies looked, in so much as a cookie can, a bit embarrassed. The spoon wielder set down its spoon and helped the one-legged cookie pry its missing limb off of the cookie sheet, and the walnut throwers put the lid back on the jar and tried to pretend that they hadn't done anything. Well, I'll be, said Aunt Tabitha under her breath. My gingerbread man finished his arm waving, turned, bowed, and extended an arm in my direction. The bad cookies looked up at me expectantly. I figured that was my cue. I cleared my throat. Right. If you are all willing to climb into these sacks here, my friend Spindle is going to take you someplace where you can be as bad as you possibly can. There's a whole lot of people trying to sleep, and I want you to make sure that they get as little sleep as possible. Cut all of the ropes and knot every lace. And who would have thought that an army of cannibals' weakness would be gingerbread cookies? It's because they're not man, they're just man shaped. Oh my gosh, makes me think. Have you heard the VeggieTales song? If it's Okay, if it doesn't have a tail, it's not a monkey, even if it's got a monkey kind of shape. There we go, that's the chorus. I trailed off. The cookie was grinning like wolves. If wolves were flat and golden brown and smelled vaguely of cayenne. It occurred to me that something made of rat poison and mischief was probably going to have better ideas about how to harass a sleeping army than a mere human baker. Do your worst then, but not until you're released from the sack and Spindle gives you to go the go ahead. That's an order. Just give all these gingerbread men knives. What do you mean, lol? What the if it doesn't have a tail, it's not a monkey? Let me go find it and drop it before I forget. If it doesn't have a tail. I don't know how many of you watch VeggieTales. Though this one was put out after I was older and was not watching VeggieTales much anymore. But still, that's just so I don't forget to send it. Time to flee. Good luck. I have your your stream open. You're not live yet. It's still just playing from yesterday. Uh I love you too, BT Dubs. Good luck and have fun. I don't know what you're playing tonight. I think they were playing. You have to put your face on. Good luck. They were playing Slay the Spire 2 yesterday. So probably Repo first, and then what? And then they were playing Overcooked yesterday. The cookies shifted their feet and looked not at me, but at the stale gingerbread man, who shook a fist, or as much of a fist a gingerbread man can make, at them. Spindle climbed out from under the table, and with remarkably little fuss, the cookies climbed into the sacks. I had been afraid that they would make an untenably large pile, but they all laid down flat and stacked together, so when Spindle slung the sack over his shoulder, he looked like a tinker with a pack rather than a St. Nicholas doing his rounds at Yule. You're sure that you can do this? I asked him. Spindle looked at the sack suspiciously. Long as they don't get any ideas. Oh, Rift's dad is gonna play with you? Fun. Is he as unhinged as Rift? Is this gonna... Is this the support that Rift wanted last night? Without any prompting, my gingerbread man hopped into the sack and climbed to Spindle's shoulder. He'll go with you, I said. If they get out of line, he'll take care of them. I hoped that was true. I hoped the cookie would keep Spindle safe, or Spindle would keep the cookie safe, or both of you stay safe, I said. Come back as soon as you've dropped him off. It was dark out. It was dark out now, and Argonal was at the door of the kitchen. I could see the red glow of our outdoor oven reflected against the side of his face. It was time to make the golems. I'll be fine, said Spindle. Won't get anywhere near 'em. He switched the sack to the other shoulder, then gave a quick, awkward hug with the other one. See you in a few hours. Knock 'em dead, and went out through the pantry. Aunt Tabitha gave a suspicious look as if she knew what Spindle was planning, and then very obviously decided not to ask about it and looked away. I took a deep breath. I didn't have time to worry. There was too much else to be done. Your oven awaits, Wizard Mona, said Argonal. Don't call me that, I said tiredly, and went to build the city's defenders out of bread. The dough golems were going to be lumpy. There was really no getting around it. They were made out of a couple 100 pounds of dough apiece, and what we wound up doing was throwing head-sized lumps of dough into a big cookie sheet, creating bigger and bigger piles until we'd built a roughly man-shaped form. The end result was going to be completely flat on the backside, and I was already worried about how we were going to pry it off of the cookie sheet. Aunt Tabitha had dumped an entire bucket of warm oil down the surface, but it was burning off fast. We'd be lucky if the oil was all but burned, was all that burned. You generally bake bread for about half an hour in the oven, maybe more or less, depending on the size of the loaf. A hotter oven cooks things faster, but there's a limit on it. You can't shove dough into a blazing inferno and expect to have baked bread in 5 minutes. You'll get a lump of rough dough with a burnt black shell. I had no idea how hot the outdoor oven was. Hotter than I'm used to, anyways. The blacksmiths were heating it like a forge. Argonal apologized to me twice about the fact that it wasn't hotter. Couldn't work good iron in this, he rumbled, holding a hand over the coals. Bread's a little easier than iron, I said. I was going to get charred black golems with raw hearts at this rate. Maybe that wouldn't matter, but I gritted my teeth, stuck my left hand into the raging heat, and touched my fingertips to the golem's head. Don't burn. You don't want to burn. There's a lot of heat there, but just pass it through to the center, and you don't have to burn. There was a lot of dough to convince. When I pulled my hand out, my index finger was angry red. I stared at it vaguely. What does staring at something vaguely mean? Is it like when you stare at something and then your vision kind of drops out and it just everything blurs? And Aunt Tabitha swung around and jammed a hand into a bucket of water. God's teeth, Mona, are you trying to burn your fingers off? The water was so shockingly cold that I yelped. I pulled my hand out and most of it was fine except for the fingertip. Bruh, I got burned. This is like I don't know if you can see it. We'll have to. This is like a 2-week old burn because I touched the inside of my air fryer. It's less red now, but it was like kind of scabby. Your bro came up with tortillas. Nice. Don't worry, I'm always getting hurt. Mm. A big watery blister was already forming, and I noticed vaguely that all of the little tiny hairs on my arm had burned off. I had to touch it, I said grimly, cradling my hand. This wasn't all at one batch of dough. I can't talk to it in the distance like I did the gingerbread. It's not It's all not all one thing. I have to make it all one thing. She gave me a look of incomprehension, but Argonal nodded. Not a wizard. Worked with a wizard smith once, though, and he said the same thing. He was always burning himself on alloys. Aloes? Your burn scars last a few years. You're not telling me that you're going to have to reach into the oven and burn yourself on every one of these things, said Aunt Tabitha. I could feel a hysterical laugh somewhere under my rib cage and shoved it down. I needed Aunt Tabitha to trust me, or at least to not stop me. It's nothing compared to what the Carricks'll do. And if they get through the walls. There was a long silence, broken by a hiss of coals and the steaming of too much dough baking too fast over too much heat. Honey's honey's good for burns, said Aunt Tabitha grimly. I'll get the crock and some gauze. And try to remember that you're the only wizard we've got, and it won't do anyone any good if you hurt yourself too badly to work before the battles even starts." Yes, Aunt Tabitha. It turned out that I had to touch the golems twice. The first time I had to convince them not to burn, and the second time I had to get them to stand up. "Hands heal quick," said Argonal, putting one of his on my shoulder. He had such ugly hands. Mine were going to be ugly too, after much of this. After much more of this, it didn't matter. If I was alive, I'd have scarred hands. I didn't care. The shields over the top of the cookie sheets were swung away. Under them, the bread had turned a lovely golem brown and risen a bit more. The resulting golem's about 12 feet long and maybe 2 feet thick. He was going to be an awfully skinny warrior. "Up!" I told the golem, fighting the urge to snatch my fingers away from the heat. "Get up! We need you to fight!" Spiraling Shadows was right. It wasn't any harder to animate something that size than it was to animate the bad cookies. The problem wasn't getting it to live, the problem was keeping it together. It tore itself off the cookie sheet. The bottom of it had burned as black as char despite the magic, and it left large rags of dough behind it. The holes made raw white wounds on its back. "Scrapers!" I gasped to Argonal, my hands deep on the buckets of water. My burnt fingers throbbed furiously. We need scrapers. We need to scrape it down somehow." He nodded. "We'll take care of it. You take care of him." The golem was swaying unsteadily on the far side of the cookie sheet. It was huge, taller than a one-story house, and it looked ridiculously thin and wobbly. Could it hit the enemy? Could it break apart if it tried? How stupid were we to think that fighting the Carricks was something made out of bread dough? It took a step forward and trotted. Trottered. "You must go. You have a low battery now. Good luck with the rest of your night." Surely there are better things in this magic world. All of the magicians are gone. I dropped the bucket and lunged for the golem. It didn't Oh gods, I didn't think about the feet. They're gingerbread men feet. How is he going to stay upright? I dropped the bucket and lunged for the golem. It didn't have expressions, but I could feel the bewilderment through the magic between us. The feet were indeed a problem, or rather, the lack of them. Our gingerbread men can balance on the ends of their legs because they're so small and nimble. The bread golem was about as far from nimble as you can get. Its legs were uneven, lumps, same as the rest of it, and if it tried to walk on them, it was going to fall forward on its face. "Hold still," I told it. "Don't fall. Lean against the wall. There. We'll figure something out." The cookie slumped against the wall. It was gigantic. It had arms like flattened tree trunks. It was completely useless if I couldn't get it to walk on the way to the gate. Argonal and Aunt Tabitha came up behind me. We were joined by a skinny apprentice with no eyebrows. All of us stared at the gingerbread man. I thought that I might cry. My brilliant idea, and all of these people working so hard on it, and the stupid thing couldn't even walk. What kind of wizard was I anyway? And I couldn't just bake him with more dough to the feet, because dough doesn't work like that. If you pile up cookie dough, you get wider cookies, not taller ones. Well, that's how you make shoes. You just layer cookie shoes on top of each other. Gingerbread men are all kind of flat when you look at them. "The base," said the eyebrowless apprentice. Did he burn his eyebrows off? "If he had a broader base to walk on, it wouldn't matter. We could strap some kind of plates to his legs, maybe." "Of course. He just needs shoes, the poor thing," said Tabitha. "Argonal?" The blacksmith nodded. "I think barrels. If he can step into the barrels for each foot, we'll pack it with straw and lash it to his legs with harnessed leather." "Do you think it'll work?" I asked. I thought it'd be more warlike. Argonal paused between waving his apprentice towards the barrels. "Whiz Mona. I think if I was the enemy and a giant made of bread came at me, even one as strange as that, I would think twice." What happens if the bread eats one of these dudes, though? Like, does it also have a stomach? Harold, who had been standing in a little ways back and scanning the scene with wary eyes, stepped forward. A soldier's strength is limited, Mona. If they have a hack, if they have to hack their way through your bread dough army, that's enough that they won't have to use. That's strength that they won't have to use on our men. I sighed. They were right, but it wasn't enough. I'd hoped deep down that my bread dough men would completely turn the tides, and that maybe if I raised enough golems they'd stomp the enemy flat, and none of our troops would get so much as a hangnail. Instead, I had one golem who could barely stand up. How many more would I be able to bake before dawn? There was only one way to find out. When the next golem was baking, I went back to the first. I suppose I had some notion that he might be panicking. He was blind and couldn't stand upright on his own, but I really shouldn't have worried. Bread doesn't panic. You can throw bread off of a cliff and it'll fall without a care in the world. It doesn't have nerves. The golem had been told to lean against the wall, and it was prepared to lean against the wall forever if necessary. It wasn't worried. The apprentices who were wrestling barrels onto the ends of its legs were a bit more worried. I darted forward and put a hand high up on the golem's leg as I could reach. Lift your foot as they can so they can slide on your new shoes. It lifted a large foot. Whoa, Aunt Tabitha said on the top of the ladder with a mixing bowl full of buttercream frosting. I grabbed from the bottom of the ladder, which had shuddered when the foot it was leaning against moved. Aunt Tabitha, just a minute, Mona dear. I have to give the poor fellow eyes. I held the ladder, with the apprentice stacked straw furiously into the barrels, and my aunt leaned across the expanse of baked face. When she finally stopped slathering, the bread golem had frosting eyes and a vague, goofy smile. Did you have to make him smile, Aunt Tabitha? I asked. I thought it'd make him look more friendly. He's supposed to be trampling Carrick's mercenaries. Fine, she sighed, took another handful of icing, and drew a slanted, angry eyebrows. Happy? Not even a little. The eyebrowless apprentice took the latter. He had blisters on the sides of his faces, probably from encounters with the oven. I glanced down at my burned fingers and couldn't resist rubbing another fingertip over it and making the fluid in the blister squish from side to side. Oh, like you've never done it. It hurt. I suspected that it was going to hurt a lot more before the night was through. By midnight, two more golems were leaning against the wall, and I had a blister on my middle finger to match the first. The barrel's shoes worked. When I asked the first golem to march up and down the courtyard, it did. It had a 10-foot stride and splintered a horse trough without even noticing. I started to feel a bit more optimistic about our chances. The strain of keeping the golems going wasn't too bad. I've animated dozens of gingerbread men at a time, and three golems wasn't much. What was really wearing on me were my bad cookie saboteurs that were in the dark. 23 smart cookies was a lot to keep going. It wasn't exactly that I had to do anything, but I could feel my energy draining away a little at a time. My muscles were a little more tired than they should have been, and when I stood up, my knees were a little bit wobbly. It felt like I was doing everything while carrying a 20-pound pack on my back. It hadn't seemed all that heavy at first, but after a few hours it was really starting to wear on me. With a fourth golem baking and the second and third being fitted for barrels, Aunt Tabitha dragged me into the kitchen. Eat, she said, shoving ham and pickles out in front of me. I was glad that it wasn't a sandwich. I don't think that I'd have eaten bread right then. Unexpectedly, the magical weight on me had lessened a fraction. It took me a minute to realize that one of the bad cookies must have been destroyed. I frowned into my pickle. I'd been planning on pulling the magic out of them when all was done. Those things were way too dangerous to be allowed to run around loose. But I still didn't like the thought of that some Carricks had wrecked one of my cookies. If she just pulls the magic and the poison cookies and just fall dead where they are, what happens to the wildlife that eats these rat poison cookies that are just left? And also what happens when the rat poison cookies get caught in the rain and the water rivers and poison the water because they disintegrate in the water. I hope he hadn't tried to eat it. They were the enemy and all, but there were limits. I felt like having people eat rat poison cookies went against everything being a baker stood for. She's not even worried about feeling bad about killing people. She is just she's ready for the army. I'd gotten halfway through the ham when another cookie went, and then two. The bowl of bad gingerbread scraps was still on on the mantelpiece. I took it down and stuck my finger in it. What's going on out there? It didn't get anything. I didn't get anything clear. There was a splatter of images inside of my head. Flick, flick, flick. It was like the experiment where I tried to listen through the scone, except that there were pictures this time because I'd given the gingerbread men eyes and they were they went stuttering by too fast to make anything out. I smelled fire, heard men shouting, felt the malicious satisfaction of a rat poisoned cookie who had done something wicked. And I think one of them was running through grass and another one was dumping gravel into a shoe and one of them was surrounded by legs and was running between boxes and then somebody was roaring and then there was a frying pan the size of a wagon wheel coming at me. I dropped the ginger ball. A few seconds later, I lost another cookie, probably the one smacked with the frying pan. I hoped that it had managed to do some damage in the kitchen tent beforehand. Mona, Aunt Tabitha looked at me. You're white as a sheet, girl. What's the matter? My head was throbbing too. Using gingerbread men as spies was never going to catch on. If I tried to do that for very long, I'd have to lie down with a cold rag over my eyes. Seeing the world through frosting is hard. Nothing. I said hoarsely. I washed my hands before finishing off my pickles. Nothing that I can do about it, anyways. Time to raise the next golem. Through the rest of that long night, I can only remember two coherent thoughts. The first was that I was so tired that if the Carricks had breached the walls and killed us all, that was an excellent chance that I'd sleep through it. The second wasn't so much a thought as a question, and it repeated itself every time I had a breath to spare. Where the heck is Spindle? She is gonna kill thousands of animals because those cookie bodies are just gonna be left there, and then they're gonna be eaten. And it reminds me in the stupid giant fighting turtle book where she just let her turtle sink to the bottom of the ocean after it took damage and she's like, "You're free." And it's like, "You just killed him. What are you doing?" An hour before dawn, Joshua came out of the courtyard. We'd raised the last golem. There was 7 of them, and I knew from one look at Joshua's face that we wouldn't have time for an 8th. "Time to go to the gate," he said. "The Duchess is already there, arranging the troops. Mona." He stopped there, because if he kept talking, he had to ask a 14-year-old girl to come to the front lines of battle, and he hated it, and knew that he had to do it, and I knew that it had to come because somebody had to tell the golems what to do. This is a lot to not actually say. I hunched my shoulders and said, "Yes, let's go." We loaded the wagon with leftover dough. There was still a lot of it, maybe 2 wagons full, although Our Lady of Sorrowful Angels only knew what I was going to do with the front lines without an oven. Still, we brought it. Often the wagons bringing their barrel-shod feet down with a sound like gigantic hoof-beats walked the golems. They were staying upright. They gave me hope. Each one of them carried a fence post in one hand to use as a club. Argonal had offered the commander a huge ceremonial axe, but the Duchess's very remote ancestors had used it to chop the heads off of bulls. I declined. On one hand, an axe takes a lot more brains to work than a club, and on the other hand, I still felt kind of bad for all of those ancestral bulls. Aunt Tabitha had put icing faces on each one, although the latter golems did not have angry eyebrows, and the last 3 didn't even have mouths. They have mouths and they cannot scream. There was one there was no one else in the streets. We reached the gates just as that odd grayish brown light We reached the gate just as that odd gray brown light that precedes dawn was starting to seep over the walls. On our side, the big gate was one of the largest squares in the city. It had to be to accommodate all of the wagons and carts coming in, and to give them space to turn so that they could get into their particular roads. Four roads led into it, not including the one through the gate, two running parallel to the walls and two coming in the angles on the far sides of the gate. All but one of those roads had been blocked with overturned wagons and wooden barricades. They weren't pretty. They looked like a cross between a furniture shop and a hedgehog. There were chairs and beds and big wooden plank nailed haphazardly to fill the gaps, and some of them had sandbags piled up from the bottom or wedged in between chairs. Spears bristled out of them. The golems could look down on them, but the enemy was going to have to climb. We have to recruit we have recruits manning the spears on the other side of each barricade, said Joshua quietly. And every archer in the city is either on the wall on top of buildings circling the square. We have to hold them here, or they'll get in the city and it'll be house to house. He didn't have to say any more. I could imagine what it would be like, huddling in your basement, hearing the doors being forced, and then men with swords bursting in, and "We'll put the golems in the square then," I said, rubbing my palms together. The fingers on my left hand had been slathered in honey, which is good for burns, and wrapped in gauze. They throbbed in time with my heartbeats. Joshua nodded. "They'll be waiting when the Carricks break through the gate. Not if," I noted, "when. If they are able to drive them back through the gates, do so." I nodded. I had, in a large bowl, 7 lumps of half-cooked dough, which I had pulled from each golem. Argonel had found some paint, and each golem had a drippy armband in a different color, which was also splashed on the bread, so theoretically I would be able to control each golem individually with the magic of sympathy. It had sort of worked, getting them to march. We hadn't had more than a few minutes to test it. I had an idea how well it was going to work with complicated orders. The golems were dumb, even for bread, and I was incredibly tired. I'd lost more than half of the bad cookies by now, and I had managed to grab 10 to 20-minute cat naps while the golems cooked, but every time a bad cookie went, I had jerked up awake again. Nothing like that had happened with the other baked goods, probably because I always pulled the magic out of them before they had gotten eaten or destroyed or whatever. It was a nasty feeling. Exhaustion was starting to creep around the edges of my vision like a gray mold. When the golems were settled, the last road was barricaded up. The wagons that had brought us here were unloaded and turned on their sides. Soldiers dragged out big wooden barriers. I recognized barn doors from the paint and braced them between buildings. "Argonal," I said as the barricades went up, leaving him on the other side with the dough and dozens of replacement barrels. "It's been an honor, Wizard Mona," he said, smiling down at me. "Don't worry. Thanks, Argonal, for you know all of it." He nodded. He didn't say anything more because I was pretty sure if I said too much more I was going to start crying, and maybe he would have too. I don't know. Wooden planks filled up the space between us. "How do we get out?" I asked Joshua. He nodded to the ladders laid against the wall. "We'll pull them up once the fighting starts. Shall we go now?" Harold came up the ladder behind me, and Aunt Tabitha came up behind him. I could hear the archers shifting and talking quietly on the roof. Somebody told a joke, and somebody else laughed one sharp bark. The view from the top of the wall of darkness, broken by the red glow of Carrick's campfires. I could see the shadows of men moving, but nothing more. The Duchess was waiting at the top of the wall. She was wearing armor. When she saw me, she smiled. "Mona, my dear." The smile faded. "Can we not find armor for her?" "Mona's not trained to fight in armor," said Joshua. "Even if she was, we don't have much for a young girl." He nodded to an aide, a tall man standing just within earshot. "Trin, run over to the armory and see what you can find for a wizard and her aunt." The wizard and her aunt. Aunt Tabitha laughed. "I suspect you'd have an easier time fitting Mona." The Duchess reached out and took Aunt Tabitha's arm and said, "Madame, we will not lose you or your niece, who have done so much for us, to a stray arrow or a misplaced bow." Aunt Tabitha, who had lost much of her fear of the monarchy in the last day, actually patted the Duchess's hand and said, "Don't worry, Your Grace. It'll take a great deal to get rid of me. Someone must make sure that all of your wizards and warriors remember to eat." Another of the bad cookies winked out. I was down to 10. I wonder if they'd done anything beyond leaving me tired enough to curl up right here on the stone wall and take a nap. Where is Spindle? Is he out there in the dark? Did he make it back inside the walls? Did he do something stupid? My little gingerbread cookie was still out there somewhere, too. I didn't know where. I didn't have anything to track him with, like the bad cookies, but I was sure that I'd feel it if he vanished. "Should the Duchess be up here?" I asked Joshua. "I mean, if they get into the city." The Duchess had sharp ears. She came and leaned on the battlements next to me. "I could hide in the palace. There are very thick doors. I could spend the next 2 days cowering in the dark room while my people die, waiting for the doors to finally be broken down and the Carricks to come for me. But I have cowered enough these last few months, and I find that I fear the dark room more than I fear dying out there in the open air." She shrugged. "What will happen if we lose?" I asked. "If he has control of the Carricks, then Oberon will take me prisoner and most likely have me executed immediately after a trial designed to convince the nobles that we are still under the rule and law and they continue pretty much as they always have. Well, it may be hard to say, my dear, but you have been a threat and a nuisance to him, and I suspect that he will have you executed if he can catch you. If he does not have control over the Carricks, then we will most likely die once they break through our defenses." I nod. It was what I had expected. That my knees went weak and wobbly and I could feel my stomach churning, well, I didn't say anything about it. The Duchess had put on that royal mask again, being strong and competent and inspiring, and I didn't want to whimper in front of her. "He'll have to go through me," growled Aunt Tabitha. "And us as well," said Joshua dryly, "but I doubt that there'll be a problem once the city is breached. There are simply not enough of us." The runner arrived with his arms full of leather and chains. As Joshua had predicted, there was very little that fit me. I had settled for a leather cap and a heavy vest out of leather with metal bits sewn into it that Joshua said were usually worn by a drummer boy. It wasn't too bad. The vest was a bit like an apron that I wore at work, just heavier, and at least my arms were still free. And Tabitha, on the other hand, had a full suit of chainmail. A lot of the guards are big, and they generally weren't big in quite the same places as Aunt Tabitha, but she made it work. It was frighteningly appropriate. She hadn't been a baker on top if she hadn't been a baker, Aunt Tabitha probably would have been one of those northern warrior women with the big breastplates that sings opera and carries off the souls of the valiant dead. While we were outfitting her, I went back to staring out at the Carrick's camp. "When is something going to happen?" I asked. "Things have been happening all night," he said. One of the big cook tents went up in flames a few hours ago, and they'd had some trouble with the horses. I assume it's the men that Spindle told us about harassing them." I grinned. "Spindle's friends. Or maybe a pack of really bad cookies." "They should attack at dawn," said Joshua. "Or as soon as the light is enough to see." The attack came 20 minutes after sunrise. Aunt Tabitha said that it had been 20 minutes anyway. Aunt Tabitha had said it had been 20 minutes anyway. She got a pretty good internal clock, always knows when the muffins are ready to pull out of the oven. It didn't feel like it had been 20 minutes, it felt more like 20 years. She looked at the sky looked like a raw egg with runny streaks of red in it. Oh my gosh, the egg sky is back. They're forming up," said Harold, standing with us on the battlement. Joshua had gone to address the archers off to the one side of the wall. I couldn't really tell what was going on, except for the milling carracks were milling more or less in our direction and forming a large crowd aimed our way. It looked more like a crowd that you get when the circus comes to town than anything military. Then they started to move toward the wall. Archers! cried the voice, and archers, archers, archers ran along the top of the wall as the officers picked up the cry and passed it down. On either side of our little knot, men with bows stepped forward and set arrows onto the strings. Harold! cried the voice. Hold! Oh, hold! cried the voice. Hold! 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 echoed past us. The Carricks broke into a run. Steady! Murmured Harold, to no one in particular. Steady, steady. Wait until they're in range. It seemed to take forever. I wanted them to fire and get it over with. Shoot the people coming at us, waving swords and axes, and I didn't even know what that was. Looked like a ball with spikes on it. Who carried around a ball with spikes on it? Oh my gosh. And what the archers held and held and held, and then fire! Arrows rained down with a hiss like butter on a griddle magnified 1,000 times. It didn't do anything. Well, I'm sure it did something. I heard some Carricks scream and a few fell down, but if there was any gaps in the crowd, they filled in immediately. It was extremely discouraging. There was another volley. The Carricks' army continued to run toward us, and there were so many of them that the ones in the back hadn't even left their camp yet. They could they could afford to throw waves at us, while the rest just sat around the campfire and toasted marshmallows. This struck me as desperately unfair. They could at least pretend that we were dangerous, out of common courtesy. Slings! shouted the voice down the wall. The archers stepped back and drew more arrows. 50 fighters, none of them guards. I saw women and a few kids barely older than I was, carrying leather slings, step forward, fitting jars full of angry Bob into their weapons, and began to twirl them over their heads. This is it, Bob. I thought hard at my favorite sourdough starter. This is your big moment. I hope you're good and mad. It was an awkward fit. Sling stones are usually a lot smaller than jars. A couple of them fell out and smashed on the wall, and a few more failed to get more than a few feet beyond the wall, but the majority sailed into the ranks of the Carricks with a crisp sound of shattering glass. Look, if you just get them, Light Lark took too Light Lark too much influence. Did this come before or after Light Lark is the question. I have to give it to Alex Astor for her devotion to the egg sky, though. Anyways, couldn't she just like throw jars of Bob on the ground? Not like into the distance, but then it basically becomes like a bear trap for somebody to step in because these guys are going to be like, oh, just this little puddle of dough right here. And then they step in it, and then your foot's eaten. You got a nub. Then it keeps crawling up your leg. And it's a horror show. Mm. That they noticed. Part of it was simple fact that you get clocked over the head with a jar, you tend to pay attention. But Bob was angry this morning, and he'd had all night to stew in his own juices, both literally and metaphorically. The Carricks who got hit by jars found themselves with a furious, slimy mass that burned like acid, and which was trying to crawl under the armor, their armor. Grumble got the star. There was a lot more yelling. Gaps opened up in the line of individual Carricks stopped running and started trying to yank their armor off and get at the Bobs. Other men slowed down to see why their comrades were yelling and stripping on the middle of the battlefields, and some of them got hit by stray bits of Bob, which immediately tried to go up their noses. Get 'em, Bob, cheered Aunt Tabitha next to me. Show these filthy mercenaries what for. Slings! The second wave of Bob hit the enemy. Given how much chaos he was causing, I was starting to wish that I'd spent less time on the golems and more time making wheelbarrows full of Bob. I still had a jar with me and a half a bucket or so back at the palace, so if we held them for a full day and they retreated at night, I might be able to whip up some more. The slingers stepped back, and the archers, who had picked up fresh quivers, stepped forward. The gaps in the enemy line that Bob had opened got bigger as the archers fired, and the crowd had finally surged against the gate, was ragged in places. I expected the crowd to fill in, but it didn't. Some of the mercenaries that had gotten a face full of Bob were down, and nobody wanted to get too close to them. Bob was fully capable of jumping if he was angry enough. He'd almost pounced on one of the guards moving barrels earlier. The downed mercenaries were twitching a bit, but that was all. I felt sick. On the one hand, I hated them for burning the fields, for attacking my city, for working for Oberon, but still, death by sourdough starter, not a good way to go. You had to feel sorry for them, and I was the one who'd brought it about. If you'd just leave, I thought. If you'd just turn around and leave, we wouldn't have to do this. The ranks of Carricks opened. A man on a horse rode down the aisle they formed. Behind him was two more men, also on horses. Was carrying a white flag. Now for the farce, muttered the Duchess. I suppose it's too much to hope they're surrendering, I said. Far too much. I believe that's Oberon. It was. The former Inquisitor rode until he stood perhaps 20 feet from the wall and looked up. The horseman, who wasn't carrying the flag, rode even closer. Some kind of herald, murmured Harold, and definitely Oberon. Shoot him, I hissed, practically hoping and hopping up and down. We've got archers. Shoot him. He's under the white flag, said the Duchess. You don't shoot people with white flags. But it's Oberon, believe me. Who's going to care? The city has been evacuated. This man was exiled and then recruited cannibals and returned. I think that you can get away with it and say it was a misfire. I am entirely sympathetic to your feelings, but we don't shoot people with the white flag in hopes that someday, if we're under the white flag, they'll return the favor. Rules of warfare. We hope they'll return the favor. Bro, I would not trust this man to follow through on any courtesies. His lordship, Oberon, Inquisitor of the city, the would address the traitor Duchess, shouted the herald. His voice was loud and carried across the walls. Men along the wall booed. The Duchess rolled her eyes and stepped up to the battlement. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted, "If Oberon wants a traitor, he should look in his own mirror. I am the Duchess, rightful ruler of the city." The men cheered. The herald's horse sidled and stamped its feet. His lordship makes you the following offer, that you now at once open the city and lay down your arms, that all aggression against our Carrick's allies ceases, and that the Duchess be handed over. I can save you the trouble, called Joshua from further down the wall. His lordship can stuff it in his arse. We will never surrender, shouted the Duchess. We will never submit to the rule of a traitor, backed by hired killers. We will fight for our city to the last man. Great waves of cheering broke over the walls. Men waved their swords and bows in the air. Under the chorus, the Duchess murmured, "At least not until sometime this afternoon, when it's that or have the city burned down around our ears." Tabitha snorted. The herald turned and rode away. Yeah, I don't think he'd return the favor either. I think he's pretty much proved it. So I think the following the white flag rule is not gonna do it. What's up, sweet baby? Do you need help? Give me a second. Good job. Good job. Is that what you needed? Are you good? I don't think he cared about the ball though. He looks like he's trying to think about what he wants. If he dares. Okay, he's just chilling. The Duchess caught my eye under The Duchess caught my eye and her lip twisted into something that vaguely resembled a smile. It wouldn't help if we surrendered, Mona. The Carricks would pillage the city anyway. Oberon may think that he can keep them on a leash and use them as his army, but once they're inside these walls, they'll tear the city apart looking for food and gold, and then squat in the ruins. And when the army gets back, they'll be the ones laying siege to the walls. The best that we can do is reduce their numbers and to make them pay for every inch of ground they take. She sighed. The Golden General will make a good ruler, probably a better one than I have been. I only pray that there will be enough left for him to rule. Oberon rode away down the aisle, and the herald and flag bearer with him. The crowd of Carricks closed around them. See, look, he just declared a threat anyway. So like what is the point of the white flag if he's going to just come in and be like, "Okay, I'm going to murder you all if you don't give up right now." I think that gives you the okay to just like shoot him down right there. I peer over the edge at the battlement. Now what do they do? None of the surrounding buildings were tall enough for them to reach the top of the wall or anything like it. The city laws were very strict about that, and there wasn't much of a point in attacking the stone walls with a sword, though some of the Carricks were pounding on the wall with their sword hilts anyway. They try to break down the gate, said the herald. They're bringing up the battering ram now. He pointed to a thick line of men with shields. Look, bro, they're battery ramming you. I think that is your perfect chance to just shoot them down. They have a shield to ward off their arrows. They were carrying a very large log. The end of the log was a big ball of steel molded into the shape of a fist. It's a knocker, said the Duchess. Dear me, I knew they probably had one, but I had hoped that I was wrong. I didn't ask why it was called a knocker. It was pretty obvious. It's just a pair of tatas. The Carricks was going to knock on the gates and then knock them down. There's an iron portcullis, isn't there? I asked. Shouldn't that hold up? Harold shook his head. Oh, it might hold up. The mortar likely won't. Something like that can knock the portcullis right out of the wall holding it and bend it so far out of shape that they can wiggle past. The knocker hit the gate. Doesn't look like it did much. I craned my neck, trying to see Aunt Tabitha grab trying to see. Aunt Tabitha grabbed my collar and hauled me back. Just wait, said Harold. A faint shudder went through the stones on the wall. I really don't like this, I said, to no one in particular, as dust sifted down from the top of the wall. It felt like the knocker was going to bring down the whole wall, not just the gate. Me either, said the Duchess. Thunk, thunk, crunch. That was a bad sound. Oh, yes. Screech, crunch. Almost through the portcullis, said Harold. The people sieging us have siege equipment, right? She's like, I had hoped they wouldn't, but I thought they would. Why do you think that these people who have made their careers destroying villages would not be prepared to pillage your city? I had expected the gate to last a lot longer. Until mid-morning at least, we had to hold them off for 2 days minimum if the army was going to show up and save us all, and in half an hour they were most of the way through breaching the walls. This was bad. At least they're not coming over the walls, said Harold, answering my thoughts. Knockers are heavy equipment to lug around, and they can't afford to drag any more siege equipment with them. The archers kept firing. The slingers flung stones. The air hissed. See, look, if they had just laid puddles of bob around the outside of the wall, they would not have been able to get to the wall with anything. The air hissed with arrows by the crunching thud as the knockers chewed away at the gates. Every time one of the men holding the knocker fell, another one ran up to the shield to take his place. I wished that I had an ocean of bob to drop on their heads. Joshua ran up, jogging with his head down to stay below the notch bowstring of the archers. Mona, they're almost through. It'll be time for the golems in a moment. I moved to the other side of the wall. Looking down into the courtyard, my ears buzzed and my feet seemed a long way away. Yes, I said, of course. I picked up the bowl full of dough. The wood splintered. The next blow went through the gates, and I looked down and saw a metal fist of the knocker emerge into the square. Joshua had suggested the arrangement of golems, 3 in front in a semicircle around the gate, 4 in the back in a large circle. I grabbed 3 balls of dough in the front, red, blue, and black, and thought, forward, stop those men. The golems stepped forward, 3 barrels. Do you not think that the knocker could just like knock over the golems? Their barrel feet clopped loudly on the stones, audible even over the shouts of the Carricks. The enemy poured through the splinter gate, past the men holding the knocker into the square, and stopped. Well, they'd probably never seen a 12-foot tall man made out of bread before, let alone 7 of them. The golem with the red band on its arm lifted its club and smacked the warrior in the lead on the head. He fell down. The mercenaries, how did he not just explode? The mercenaries looked to their leaders in the golem. They did not look at the wall, thankfully, where they might have seen a 14-year-old girl scowling furiously into a bowl full of bread dough. To give credit where it's due, the Carricks did not stay surprised for long. There was a reason that they were the most feared mercenaries in the land. They might not use magic themselves, but they understood when they were facing it, and while they were afraid of it, they didn't back down. Neither did the golems. Red, black, and blue swung their clubs, knocking warriors into each other, into the walls, and sending them rolling across the cobblestones. I was absurdly proud. There was weight behind those blows. I had always been impressed at the strength of gingerbread men in relation to their size, and my golems were just as strong. They might only be bread, but the way that they moved, they might as well have been made of stone. The first group of Carricks through the door didn't even make it past the first 3 golems. The second group, rather than engage, tried to charge past them and found themselves running into the arms of green, white, orange, and purple. Well, not the arms so much as the knees. The third group of Carricks paused at the gate and seemed to be having a heated discussion with one another about the best way to proceed. The archers picked off a few more. I grabbed a ball of dough that belonged to Red. Down in the square, Red dropped its club, took up 2 heavy strides forward, and grabbed the end of the knocker. It couldn't quite pick up the battering ram. Even magic bread had its limits, but it hauled the knocker into the square, and the men on the other end yelled and squawked and hung on until they realized that they were being dragged inside of the walls. Having seen what had just happened to the other Carricks, they prudently let go. Red dragged the knocker inside and dumped it against the wall. You know, I always wanted one of those, the Duchess said. Red picked up its club in time to meet the next wave of Carricks. This time, they'd gotten smart. They went for the golem's knees, just above the barrels. I imagined that they were thinking that if they could hack through the bread there, the golems would be down and helpless. It was a pretty good plan. However, you probably know that if you haven't ever tried to cut a loaf of bread, you can't just stab it with a sharp knife. Stabbing it doesn't do a whole lot, except get your knife stuck in the crust. You need a serrated blade, and you need to saw back and forth with it to slice the loaf off. It takes a little time. I sank my fingers into the dough. Generally, when I had the cookies do this, it was a dance number to amuse the customers, but "Are they doing the can-can?" I asked Harold in disbelief. "Battle can-can," said the Duchess wisely. "Very old tactical maneuver used to defeat the waltzing berserkers of West Quillmark, as I recall. You just made that up." "Well, obviously." The golems could do a pretty good high kick. It took their legs out of range of the Carricks and generally took the swords along with them. Red had a sword stuck through his left knee, and Blue had 2 swords in the right, and Black took the prize with 3 swords and 1 axe buried part way into his thigh. Since the bread really didn't care if there was a knife stuck in it, this didn't slow them down at all. The kicks also meant that the owners of these weapons had all just taken a high velocity barrel to the torso and were most likely out of commission. There was a high pause while the Carricks tried to fight out what to do next. while staying out of the way of our archers. A semicircle of clear ground formed in the front of the gate. I took the opportunity to slump against the battlements. The magical weight that I seemed to be carrying around got a lot heavier when the fighting started. Even the loss of a couple more bad cookies sometime during the battle couldn't balance it out. I felt like I was trying to jog uphill, carrying a backpack full of rocks. Aunt Tabitha felt my head. "You're flushed, and you feel hot." That's true. Your evidence of your older brother injuring himself on a bagel? Oh no. And Tabitha, we're having a war. I don't think that I can have a lie down. She frowned. Just don't hurt yourself, girl. You're the only niece that I've got. I'm the only wizard the city's got, too. I pushed myself upright. The only wizard, aside from knackering Molly. I wish that she were here. I know that if it wouldn't help, I don't know if it would help, but it would be nice not to be the only one. And more than anything, I wish Spindle was here. I hope he's okay. Well, we know who's showing up in this last chapter, that's for sure. A group of Carricks carrying bows came through the crowd, and their fellows, which was now largely standing around, holding shields over their heads. "This is where you see the advantage of military discipline," said Harold. "Our troops would keep attacking until they brought them down through sheer force of numbers, but none of the mercenaries want to be the first one through the gate." Their archers reached the front lines, knelt, and began shooting at the golems. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Stab a bunch of toothpicks into a loaf of bread, and you've got, I don't know, an appetizer or something, not a dead golem anyhow. Clearly, the Carricks still had no idea what they were dealing with. Our archers had to lean over the edge of the battlements to shoot, but there was a minute where the Carricks shot the golem and our men shot at the Carricks, and by the end there were a lot fewer Carricks archers, and red and black looked like hedgehogs. Blue had been mostly shielded by the broken gate and just stood there until a foolish Carricks came around the edge of the wall and got a face full of fence post. The archers retreated. There was more hurried discussion on the ground. This time, when they attacked, they sent twice as many men in. The four golems in the back had to do the can-can as well, but after about 10 frantic minutes, I had a pounding headache and the Carricks hadn't gotten anywhere. Two or three had managed to get past the golems to the barricade, where they were promptly picked off by archers on the roof. I was feeling a grim sort of hope, even looking over the other side of the walls and seeing just how many Carricks remained couldn't quite squelch it. You know, I know she's in the middle of a battle. I'm wondering if she's going to deal with like any of the thoughts of just like experiencing war. She's literally experiencing war, watching a bunch of people die firsthand. Is that going to be something that affects her long term, or is it just like, nah? Uh, Blue's barrel is getting pretty beaten up, said the Duchess. I nodded. Argonel is supposed to have some spares at the wagon. I had Blue fall back. White took his place, and Blue walked over to the barricade on the palace road. It was the lowest of the bunch, and Blue was able to step over it somewhat awkwardly, seeing the number of golems diminish and Carrick's attack again. They were beaten back, but more made it through the barricades, and Black was limping now. A suicidal brave Carricks with an axe had actually climbed onto Black's leg and gotten a couple of solid hacks onto his knee before the golem managed to detach him. "Can you heal them?" asked the Duchess. I chewed on my lower lip. "He needs patching. It's not a wound exactly. His leg just all of won't hold him up all the way. I've got dough, I can fix it, but I need to be down there to make it work." Has moral injury occurred? I don't think so, no. Blue stepped back over the barricade and back into the fray. The Carricks retreated again. Harold and the Duchess held a brief conference. "Quick," said the Duchess, "before there's another wave. Draw down onto the roof there and around the back. Harold knows the way. Hurry." I followed Harold. Aunt Tabitha came down the ladder after us. It took us down to a roof, and then we went down to the fire escape and into the streets. It was much scarier down on the ground. You couldn't see what was going on. You could just hear a dull roar of the army outside the walls. I fretted. If the Carricks attacked before we got back, the golems could fight on their own, but if anything unexpected happened, well, Bread's not good at independent thought. If the Carricks broke through the barricade while we were on the ground, then we were going to be overrun by angry people with swords, and that would be exciting for about 30 seconds and not in a good way. It seemed to take a lot longer to get to the ground to go around the square than it had to cross it, even though we ran. The cobblestones were the rounded ones that look like sweet buns, and we had to be careful because those were always a bit slippery underfoot. When we finally rounded the corner and saw Argonal in the barrels, I let out a cheer. Argonal whipped around and very nearly cracked Harold over the head with his smith's hammer before he realized who it was. "Oh, it's you, Mona. The golems are doing much better than we had hoped," he grinned. "But what are you doing down here from the walls?" "It's Black," I said, grabbing the black marked dough ball and ordering him to come back over to the barricade. "He's going to lose a leg in a minute if I don't fix him." Argonal nodded. We all scattered to the walls as Black's foot came down. He wavered for a moment. That knee was definitely going, then caught his balance. I grabbed a glob of dough out from one of the barrels and crammed it into the wedge of the axe that had cut out Black's leg. I had to climb up the barrel to get to it. The Carrick's axeman had been a lot taller than I was. Aunt Tabitha came up behind me and handed me several more handfuls until we'd managed to fill in the gap. "All right," I said. "Let's see if this works." I put my hand on either side of the rough dough and thought hard about how I wanted it to fuse with the bread around it, seal up the gap, and become part of the golem. It was hard. The magic of sympathy was working against me here. This dough wasn't part of the same batch, and it hadn't been baked together. I was already feeling magically exhausted, and for a minute or two, nothing seemed to happen. There was a yell from the barricade. I jerked my head and saw that the Carricks had taken advantage of the gap in the line to charge again, and this time they kept coming and climbing. Men on the barricades were stabbing with spears to try and fend them off, but as I watched, two helmeted heads plopped over the top. Argonal and Harold rushed to help. The first two Carricks were knocked back down, and now three more were coming up at the sides, and one was, oh, sweet lady of the sorrowful angels, one was actually over the barricade and coming this way. And Tabitha yanked a hammer from the fingers of the apprentice, who had turned a sort of green and charged the enemy, whooping. I grabbed the dough in front of me and thought, "You play nice and be a patch on this golem right now." Black grunted. The patch of dough oozed into position and hardened into a floury crust. I scrambled down, just in time to see Aunt Tabitha reach a Carrix. The enemy warrior clearly had no idea what to make of the berserk woman charging at him, with her house dress flopping madly over her jangling armor. He gaped at her. Aunt Tabitha whacked him with the hammer so hard that his helmet got knocked halfway around his head and he fell down. She kicked him a few times. Aunt Tabitha had very definite opinions about people who tried to invade her city. Standing up made my head spin, and for a minute I nearly fell down myself. The magic was draining out of me in a steady drip, drip, drip like an untreated wound. But if Aunt Tabitha was fighting the Carricks, I didn't have time to faint. I bit my lip hard and thought, "You stop that," and the world stabilized and stopped going fuzzy and gray around the edges. I exhaled. Time to get Black back in the fray. I turned to pat him on the leg. "Back you go. There's a good golem." That pat saved my life. The spring green man's knife hit my shoulder at an angle instead of the back of my neck, and the point skittered off of the armor jerkin. I yelped. I wanted to scream, but a thin little yell was all that came out. Harold and Argonal and Aunt Tabitha were busy with the barricades, and there was a Carrix coming over to the side, and Black was knocking them down, but some had still gotten over, and the green spring man was lifting the knife for another blow, and that similar heavy, sweet smell was all around us, and he bared his teeth at me like an animal. "Third time pays for all, little bread wizard," he hissed, and I knew that my luck had finally run out. But guess who's here? It's probably Spindle and Molly. There was something stuck in his teeth. Here I was about to die, stabbed to death by a deranged wizard, and that was what I noticed. There was something stuck in his teeth. Yay! Craft is done. I'm gonna go look. Zero cats needed for this job. He's making himself a part of it anyway. Very cool pictures. Those are gonna look really nice next. Oh, look at them! And you hung them. Very nice. I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing. Next, what are you gonna interior decorate next? Fortunately, the rest of my body knew what was important. My knees decided, oops, give me a second. Do. Please go back. Please go back. Hmm. Well, consume lots of blueberry goods tomorrow. Heck yeah. Gonna get some blueberry lemonade. I caught myself and took off at a run, sliding on the cobblestone. If I could get back to the wall, surely Joshua and the Duchess could defend me, or we could knock him off of the ladder or something. He couldn't climb the ladder with a knife in his hand, could he? Right away, I realized that I was in trouble. The weight of magic was still with me, even if I was running for my life. It was like trying to run with concrete blocks strapped to my ankles. I dropped the rest of the bad cookies ruthlessly and got a little bit back, but I didn't dare cut off the golems. The golems were the only thing standing between the Carricks and the city. Oh God, oh God, oh God, to die. Your cat daughter is being whiny. She just knows what she wants, okay? And then it's you. It's you. I could hear Elgar's footsteps pounding behind me. Where were the archers? Couldn't one look this way and see what was happening and shoot him? And the jerkin, which had saved my life before, might kill me now. It was so hot and so heavy, and I couldn't seem to breathe right with it pressing against me, and the horrible spicy smell was filling my lungs and making it even harder to breathe. Is this the street that goes back to the wall? I think this is the street. There's a building at the end, the red brick one. With the fire escape? The spring green man grabbed my shoulder, wrenched me around, and slammed me into the wall of the nearby alley. Guess it doesn't matter now. Elgar grabbed my wrist in one hand. It was completely and utterly unfair that when you are a 14-year-old girl, even if you have amazing forearms, your wrists are still small enough for somebody else to hold them with one hand. I flailed. Well, let me tell you, girl, being 14 doesn't mean I have little tiny wrists and I'm not 14, okay? Toasty! I flailed, and I think that he was surprised at how strong I was, but I didn't go anywhere except back against the brick wall. Hard. Blood thudded in my ears. He lifted the knife. The blade beamed. The sun was shining down into the alley, and that meant that it was nearly noon. We held out until noon. That was pretty good, wasn't it? You're not getting away from me again, Elgar said. I wasn't leaving the city until I saw you dead. I could hardly hear him over the pounding of my blood, and it was in my ears and shouting of the battle a few yards away, but I got the gist. Would have thought you'd be with Oberon, Elgar spat. That idiot. Once he took the city, I was going to kill him anyway. A wizard emperor. Just think of it. I guess. I guess really bad people all think that they are using each other and being clever about it, and they all want to be in charge. You never see them stabbing each other over who gets to be the baker. And because I was really going to die right this minute and it didn't matter much anymore, I said, "You've got something stuck in your teeth." He blinked. I guess this was not the sort of thing that people say when you're about to be stabbed by them, huh? A what? In your teeth. Sort of green? What is wrong with you? This is an excellent question. I was sort of wondering that myself. The spring green man lifted the knife higher, and then something happened very fast, and something made of rag and bone sang past my face, and Elgar was flung halfway down the alley because Nag had just kicked him in the head. Apparently, that thudding noise had not been my heart pounding in my ears after all. "Oh, yeah!" yelled Spindle, scrambling down from behind Molly as Nag's hooves landed back on the cobbles. "Oh, yeah! That's for Tibby, you green monster! I hope you rot!" Nag, being dead himself, did not object to Spindle jumping off of his back, nor did he seem to notice when I threw my arms around one of his back legs and hugged him furiously. Knackering Molly snorted. It seems like I keep finding you in trouble, Baker girl. I'm alive, I moaned into Nag's hip bone. "Molly, Nag, Spindle." Spindle looked from Elgar's limp body. "What?" "You're alive. I'm alive." I started giggling hysterically because otherwise I was going to sit down and sob right there in the alley. "We're all alive, except Nag. We're all, ugh." My stomach clenched. I went down to my knees and last night's dinner came back up. "Ooh," said Spindle. He had left off kicking the late Elgar and was going through his pockets. "It happens," said Knackering Molly firmly. "Takes everybody differently, so don't go making fun, Spindle." Spindle rolled his eyes. I wiped at my mouth and felt somebody pull my hair back. When I looked, my gingerbread man was standing on my shoulder and he waved. You can't really hug a cookie, but I leaned my cheek against him and feeling deep relief. "What happened to you?" I asked. "I've been worried sick. I thought the Carricks got you." Spindle rolled his eyes. They may be good with swords and all, but they ain't got the least idea how to catch a sneak. I got in and got out, and last I saw, those nasty little gingerbread mites were cutting up the ropes in one of their supply tents. No, no, the problem was getting back in. He spat on the cobble. A stupid thief slug caught me and started telling people that I was a spy and not to let me back in the city. Though it was funny as anything. Thought it was funny as anything, the great lump. Too exciting in here? Is that because of all of the caps? I mean, Blueberries, Toasty, Ruth, Grumble, Bobby, Vanya, James. What's not to be excited about? Thanks for still liking your cat's name. How could we not? Lucky for him, I came along and convinced Slug otherwise, said Molly mildly. She snapped at Nag's shoulder. "Figured I should bring him up here on my own. The city's lost its mind now. There's a battle on." I exhaled. My stomach stayed quiet. My cookie was fine. Spindle was fine. Everyone was. A golem winked out like a dying star. The golems! I shot upright. There wasn't anything left in my stomach anyway, but even if there had been, I didn't have time to be sick. I had to get back to the golems now. Get her something that she likes, whatever that is. Take her on a kitty date. Make a cake. Adopt another cat. I love you. Here's another one. I ran back down the alley. Spindle cursed and ran after me. I could hear Nag's irregular hoofbeats following. I shot out of the mouth of the alley and practically into the arms of Aunt Tabitha. Mona, we thought something happened. Something did happen. Elgar tried to stab me, and Nag saved me, and oh, it doesn't matter now. We've lost a golem. Two, said Aunt Tabitha grimly, and before she finished speaking, I felt another one fail. They figured out that knocking them over, and then they can't get up again. We rushed back into the barricade. I grabbed for my bowl of dough, but it was too late. The third golem teetered and fell down with a great tree, like a great tree, and the Kyrix jumped on it, hacking and sewing with swords like blind men trying to slice bread. Picnics are nice. Though taking a cat out on a picnic could be kind of scary. There were mercenaries coming up the barricades now. Ours was the lowest and least built up on the walls, and they clearly knew it. If they could get over the barricades and tear it down, they wouldn't have to scale any of the others. They'd have a straight shot into the city and could come up behind the defenders on the other streets. I ordered the four remaining golems into a wedge defending our barricade. That would buy us some time. But time for what? There was still dough left. When they unloaded the wagon, they'd left a dozen barrels in neat lines on either side of the streets, and that ridiculous coffin from the Church of Sorrowful Angels was laid on top of him. Argonal and Harold stood back from the barricades, and the golems were keeping enough of the Carricks back that the regular guards could handle it. Harold said, Mona, we have to get you away from here. They're going to break through. No, I said. My plan was crystallizing inside of my head. It wasn't a good plan, but what else was new? No, help me empty those barrels. I need as much dough as we can get. But shoved him aside, grabbed the barrels, and shoved it on its side. Dough glorped stickily into the street. It wasn't right for the bread dough. It was more sugar, and dark brown lumps floated on the surface. Chocolate chip cookie dough? Asked Aunt Tabitha blankly. Who went to all of the trouble of making cookie dough? The name on the side of the barrel was one of the most exclusive pastry shops in the city. We dumped out four more barrels, and three of them were chocolate chip. Well, okay, chocolate chip cookie dough. I can do this. It shouldn't be any different than bread, just raw. Another golem went down. The roar of triumph from the Carricks crashed over the barrier. I shoved both hands up to the elbow into the piles of dough and tried to think. Aunt Tabitha and Argonal continued dumping dough around me, and I made a pile in the street as high as my knees. Not a gingerbread man standing upright wasn't going to be much help. And anyway, I would have needed a rolling pin as big as a tree trunk, something lower and legless and oozy. Wake up, I told the dough frantically. Wake up, get up, we need you. The dough didn't want to. It didn't like the shape that I had chosen. It wasn't a real shape. It wasn't baked yet. It was old and stiff from sitting in overnight in the barrels, and it was feeling obstinate. We don't have time for this. Get up. There were too many different doughs all muddled together. They weren't combining. I jumped onto the pile and began stomping around, kneading with my boots. You are one. You are the same. Get up. The gingerbread cookie yanked on my ear. I looked up and saw one of our guards, nobody I knew, but one of ours, fall down from the top of the barricade. Carrix stood up there with bloody sword in his hand, and nobody was stopping him. Argonal and Harold leapt up and placed themselves between me and the barricade, but I knew that we were out of time. Even if we stopped this one, there would be more. Get up! I screamed at the dough. I had so little magic left that I couldn't see straight, but I had plenty of rage and horror to go around, and I poured it all down on my hands and into the pile of dough. Get up, you stupid thing! Get up and fight! It got up. Well, I suppose it was a slug as much as it was anything. I tried to think of it as a slug because the magic works so much better when things are shaped like animals or people. So, a slug. A slug with fists. It's Gary with fists. Boiled chicken? For the cat or little fishes? Little fishes. Shrimp. It was only about waist height, but the front pulled itself off the ground, and two flailing arms came out, and it slithered across the cobblestone towards the barricade, and two startled Carricks standing on top of it. "Gods and devils," said Knackering Molly. "What have you done, baker girl?" "The best I could," I said, and tried to stand up. My knees buckled. I realized, with mild surprise, that the energy that normally went into making my legs work was now going into animating the chocolate chip slug monster. The slug reached the barricade. Our guards scrambled out of the way, and it slimed over the top easily. The dough was sticky enough that it didn't have any problems with the footing, and anyway, it didn't exactly have feet. One of the Carricks hacked it with a sword. The sword sunk into the dough with a gloop noise, and it didn't come back out again. The slug lashed out with tentacles and knocked them both backward onto the square. It wasn't very fast, but it was scary. Still, what could it do against thousands of Carricks? Aunt Tabitha grabbed my shoulder. I swayed under her hand. I'd given up too much magic to the dough bird, and it exploded. If I gave the slug too much magic, it would also explode. If I could just get out into the main body of the Carricks, I could pour magic into it, and it would turn into a giant mobile bomb. I knew, even as I hung limply in Aunt Tabitha's grasp, that this would be the end of me. I had pushed the magic much further than I thought I could, but it was done. If I tried to pour that much of myself into the slug, it would be with the energy that kept my heart beating and my lungs moving. I could send it oozing across the battlefield and blow it up, but that would be the last thing that I did. I thought it likely the golems would keep going for a little while after my death. A few minutes to last, at least. Maybe even an hour. Probably not long enough to save the city, but maybe long enough to make a difference. Aunt Tabitha and Spindle and Argonal would have time to get away. Get me over to the dough, I choked out. My tongue felt thick and strange in my mouth. Aunt Tabitha shook her head. "You're done," she said. Did Bob turn into a bioweapon? Sort of. Oh no, no, he didn't. They put him in jars and then we're throwing them at people. They did make rat poison gingerbread men, though. I wanted to laugh. In another minute, that wouldn't be a problem. I've seen corpses that look better than you do right now, Mona. I wanted to laugh. In another minute, that wouldn't be a problem. I have to. There are no other wizards left. I tried to crawl forward. The gingerbread man grabbed my ear and tried to pull me back. I needed that dough for the magic of sympathy. Why were the barrels so far away? If I couldn't get to the barrels, then blow up the slug. There was a long pause while Aunt Tabitha wrung her hands, and then Knackering Molly slid down her horse and said, "There's one more, anyway." Also, hey, Raylands. Wait a minute. What? Raising my head was a greater effort than anything I'd ever felt. If we hadn't lost another golem, I'm not sure that I could have done that, even done that. But my little energy, but my little thread of energy had come back to me, and I looked up. Molly held my eyes for a long moment. Hers were dark and deep, and I don't know what she read in mine. She turned away and went to Nag. He lowered his bony head and stood with their foreheads pressed together, the living woman and the dead horse. "We have to get away," Harold started to say again, and then the world jumped about 6 inches sideways, and I fell over. "Mona!" Aunt Tabitha said. "What's wrong?" asked Spindle. They both grabbed for me, and I realized that neither of them had felt it. I looked up. Molly was swaying. Nag's bones rattled a strange rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. I would get everything that I will. I would bet everything that I will ever own that it was the sound of Knackering Molly's heartbeat. We walked stiffly around Nag's side and climbed onto his back. He continued to rattle a bone heartbeat. "Did you hear something?" asked Spindle. In the square, the Carracks fought the slug, and arrows hissed, and the army roared, and steel clashed. But on our side of the barricade, everything seemed strangely silent except for Nag's bones. Then I heard it. It sounded like running water. Far in the distance, coming from within the city, Knackering Molly went bent low over Nag's neck. She was shaking like a woman sobbing, but she made no noise at all. The sound was getting nearer and louder and deeper, and it was running as if it was running water. It was a flash flood, not a stream. "Molly," I said. She'd done something magical, something that made the world jump, something huge. Knackering Molly looked over at me and smiled just a little. Her fingers flickered out in a small, ironic salute. The road began to shake. Buildings rattled as if the knocker were thumping into them. Tabitha yelled, "Earthquake!" But Spindle let out a whoop and pointed down the street. Knackering Molly had called the dead horses of the city to its defense, and the horses had come. They were made of bone like Nag, and flashed ivory in the sun. Many of them must have broken from the ground or from underground crypts, and bits of dust and dirt still clung to them. Some were so old that they were hardly any bones, just clouds of dust formed into the shape of running horses. The magic that held them together was so much stronger than anything that I could do, than anything that I had ever seen. It was no wonder the army had tried to recruit Molly. The amazing thing was that they'd ever let her go. Aunt Tabitha picked up Spindle with one arm and me with the other and shoved us back against the wall. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Argonal throwing his apprentice into a doorway. The men on the barricades stood and gaped at the horses. First the slug, and now this. And then some of the smarter ones realized that someone was standing in the way of that charge was going to be trampled, that anyone standing in the way of that charge was going to be trampled. They scattered. The horses hit the barricade, and it fell under their hoofs. Bone dust manes whipped behind them. Watching them leap over the remains of the wall was like watching the great waterfall of bone. I'd never seen anything else like it, and if I lived 100 years old to be 100 years old, I imagine I never will. "How many are there?" asked Aunt Tabitha, almost to herself. I tried to think of how many there could be. Our city of is hundreds of years old, and many generations of horses have lived and died within its walls. Knackering Molly had called all of them. They charged into the square and through the gates, into the Carrick's army, with Nag at their head and Molly on his back. When the Bone Army had finally passed us by, a matter of minutes, I suppose, although it seemed to go on for hours, it took a bit before any of us were willing to leave the walls. When you have seen a thing like that, a thing impossible and glorious and horrible all at once, it takes a minute before you can really think again. "Oh," said Aunt Tabitha finally. "Oh my." It broke the spell. Spindle jumped up and down and punched the air and shouted, "Hoo-ah! You show 'em, Molly. Give 'em one for Tibby." "Is it over?" asked Argonal. "Wizard Mona, do you know?" "I haven't a clue," I admitted, testing my feet cautiously. They seemed to be working mostly. "Should we go look?" As a little knot, Harold and Argonal and Aunt Tabitha and Spindle and I, plus an apprentice and 3 or 4 guards, crept to the edge of the street. The barricade had been pounded into splinters, and we peered out cautiously. There was nothing living in the square. The slug monster oozed a slow circuit around the walls. The broken gates had been torn apart completely out at the hinges. We inched forward. I leaned heavily on Spindle, partially to keep from falling down, partially to keep him from running off. At the gate, we peered out over the battlefield. It was a sea of bucking bones. Hundreds of dead horses, from nearly full skeletons to roiling dust, were trampling across the Carracks. The greatest concentration of horses, after all, was not inside the city, but in the bone pits of the knacker yards and slaughterhouses, which were outside of the walls. Hundreds of horses came from inside the city, but thousands rose from outside it, and they hit the Carracks army like a hammer. The mercenaries were backing away from the city trying to fight, but bones are worse than bread. If you stab a skeleton with a sword, it doesn't stop the skeleton, and the odds are good that your sword will get wrenched out of your hand in the process. They're retreating, breathed Harold. Sweet mother of us all! They're actually retreating! Nobody was shooting from the battlement anymore. I suspect that the archers, like the rest of us, were simply staring down at the slack-jawed awe. We picked our way a little further from the walls. The road dipped a little, and we could see the skeletal army charge laid out in front of us, an arrowhead of bone driving deeper and deeper into the enemy ranks. They're nearly through, said Argonal. Are they going to turn around? Harold shook his head. I don't think we're dealing with normal tactics here anymore. The arrowhead pierced through the other side. The mercenary army was cut in half, and apparently there was a final straw. That was the final straw, because we watched the men stopped trying to fight back. The retreats became a rout, and the rout became desperate, scrambling flight. The Carrick's army broke and ran. When we found Knackering Molly at last, she was dead. I had expected it. I think I had known since the first moment when she pressed her forehead against Nag's. She had done what I had thought to do with the last golem, poured herself into the magic and driven it forward with her death. I still had hoped that I was wrong. She was lying in a little clearing in the middle of the battlefield with 500 bones of horses facing inward around her, watching. There wasn't a mark on her. She was curled up on her side as if she had slipped off Nag's back and collapsed from exhaustion, and I imagined that was pretty much what had happened after all. It was all the magic that killed her, I said. She always said that getting she al- I think that's always. She always said that getting mixed up with the armies and generals would get you killed, said Spindle, wiping his eyes. I could tell that he felt guilty for persuading her to come, and yet she'd saved us. If he hadn't, the Carricks would be running through the streets even now. The Duchess and Joshua had come down from the walls, and we all walked through the silent army together. Empty eye sockets turned to follow us as we strode past. It could be it could have been unbelievably creepy, but I was so very tired, and the Carrick's army was routed, and there was nothing left to feel but relief and grief. There was still room for grief. She saved us all, said the Duchess. Joshua leaned down and closed Molly's eyes. A great sigh filled the air, and the bone horses folded up and dropped to the ground. Clouds of white dust roiled up and settled slowly around us. Nag was the only one left standing, and as we watched, he went down to his knees and stretched out his head along the ground by Knackering Molly. And when he was old bones and rags of tattered cloth, and then he was old bones and tattered cloth, that made me cry even harder, because that was when I knew it was really over. The Duchess looked at me helplessly. Mona, you knew her. She saved us. Without the two of you, what should we do? What would she want? Spindle and I looked at each other, but it was Spindle who spoke up. She and Nag should be buried together, he said, dragging a sleeve across his face. And not in one of those big fancy tombs. She'd think it was stupid. Maybe a park. She would have liked a park. With a statue, perhaps? Asked the Duchess. We have to do something. Spindle and I looked at each other. I choked down a lump in my throat and tried to talk. A statue of Nag would be okay, I said, but not a stupid one. It has to have Nag in it like he really was, not, heroic. She wouldn't have had she wouldn't have had to be a hero. She shouldn't have had to be a hero. No, said the Duchess. No, no one should. Joshua picked up Molly very carefully and carried her back to the city, our city, and we all went home. The army arrived 2 days later, a day late as it turned out, but that was okay. Most of the Carricks didn't stop running until they hit the mountains, and the army got home in time to mop up some of the stragglers and most of the wounded, all of whom wanted to surrender. They got put to work rebuilding the outlying farms, and the Duchess had a certain sense of poetic justice. All told, apart from knackering Molly, we lost 7 people. 5 of those were on the barricades. One was an old veteran who had volunteered to help fight and whose heart gave out in the middle of the battle, and one of the guards found in the alley with his throat cut. We are pretty sure that that was the work of the Spring Green Man. There was few more than the outlying farms who refused to evacuate, but there wasn't anything that I could have done about them, and I tried hard not to feel guilty. Joshua saw that we took a few casualties. What a stupid word. There's nothing casual about it, because the golems held them off until Knackering Molly did her part. I'd like to think that he's right. The Golden General offered me a post in the army, but I told him that I didn't want to even think about making golems for at least a year, and Aunt Tabitha pointed out that I am 14 and not nearly old enough to go traipsing around with the military, which was sort of embarrassing, but also a relief. It's hard to say no to someone like the General. And I was going to say no. I still liked Lord Ethan, but I wasn't going to be responsible for turning other people into heroes. Oberon's personal possessions, a ring and some papers, turned up on the battlefields, but they couldn't identify a body. Spindle has a theory about this, which involves the phrase mangled beyond recognition. He is quite gleeful about it, and I have a different theory. I think it's possible that he got away and left a false trail behind him. As long as he stays far, far away from the city, that's fine. I'd like to see him punished, but even more than that, I just want him gone. Spindle lives with us now. We repainted the room so that it's not pink and don't have a sampler on it. I'm not sure if he really wanted to live with us, but the Duchess threatened to knight him, and if you're going to be a knight, then you have to be a squire first. When he found out that you spend all of your time taking care of some guy's armor and his horses and taking lessons in chivalry, he couldn't get out fast enough. There was still the matter of a ceremony, mind you. Stop fidgeting, said Aunt Tabitha, straightening the folds on my dress. Don't wring your skirt in your hands, you'll get it all crumpled. It was very kind of the Duchess to do all of this at once, I said faintly, trying to grab not to grab handfuls of cloth and twist them frantically. If I had to go through this for every single medal, I'd die. You won't die, said Aunt Tabitha. You'll be fine. She fussed with my hair, which was hopeless. Everybody'll be looking at the Duchess. Or at Spindle. Compared to Spindle, I was positively presentable. The Duchess would happily give him a dozen suits of formal clothing, but he was having none of it. We compromised on the page's uniform that he'd worn that long ago not long ago night in the palace. On that not long ago night in the palace. 2 weeks ago. It had been 2 weeks ago. I felt like I had aged so much in the last 2 weeks that I half expected my hair would come out white. Spindle tugged at the collar of his tunic and muttered something in a thieves' cant. The gingerbread man stood on my shoulder. He had new icing buttons for the occasion. Joshua opened the door and said, "We're ready for you." "I'm scared," I whispered. "So am I," Joshua whispered back. "I hate these things. You're up first, so you get to leave early. I think I'm getting made a marshal, and I have to stay until the end." This made me feel a little better. At least they weren't making me marshal. We stepped out of the room and into a narrow corridor with a door at the end. Joshua opened the door, which led into the courtyard. We were having an outdoor ceremony. Two guards on either side clicked the butts of their halberds against the floor. I gulped. "Straight ahead," Joshua murmured. "Stop on the third step of the dais next to the general. Spindle, go right behind her, and stop on the second step." We walked in, and I went up the steps, staring at my feet to make sure that I didn't trip and fall. When I reached the Golden General, I looked up. He looked just as tall as he had the first time I'd seen him, but a lot more tired. His shoulders were a little stooped, and he had lines around his eyes. He winked at me. The Duchess stood in the middle of the dais on the highest step. "My people," she began, waving at the crowd, and then I couldn't hear her any more over the cheering. "Poor," muttered Spindle at my right hand. "Look at all these swells." The swells were the entire assembled court. There were a lot of nobles. I guess those were the council. Most of them looked old and richly dressed and somewhat disgruntled, but there was one plump woman who grinned at me, and I think that she was the representative of the various guilds. Aunt Tabitha was a guild baker, so technically I was one of her people. I wondered if having a baker save the city would have any political repercussions. Uncle Albert was in the front row, off to one side, and Aunt Tabitha came out and joined him. Argonel was there too. I'd asked if Jeremy could join them, and she was wedged. Oh, I asked if Jenny could join them, and she was wedged in behind Aunt Tabitha. All of them were grinning hugely, except for Uncle Albert. He met my eyes, nodded just slightly, and I wondered what sort of ceremony they'd had when they gave him a medal for a siege that shouldn't have happened. Past all of the brightly colored nobles were several ranks of guards in shiny armor, and a huge crowd of plain, ordinary citizens. My people. They were packed to the walls of the courtyard and out past the carriage drive, standing on each other's shoulders to try and get a better view. I actually saw Widow Holloway on the shoulders of Brutus the Chandler. There were a lot of people, and I wondered if I was going to faint or scream or wet myself or otherwise disgrace myself. It seemed likely. Blueberry muffins. Think about blueberry muffins. What's the recipe? Step 1. Get some fresh blueberries. Don't usually get a crowd like this unless there's a hanging. Don't help, Spindle. The Golden General chuckled. The first time is the worst, he murmured to me. The first time I won a great victory and had to get medals. I almost wish that I'd lost instead. They get easier after this. You'll see. I don't intend to do this again. No? He arched an eyebrow. I expect this won't be your last set of medals, my dear. Heroism is an unfortunate habit. It would not have occurred to me in 2 weeks ago to argue with the Golden General, but I opened my mouth to do just that, and then I heard the Duchess say, "Mona, the Wizard of the Bakery, step forward." And the crowd went completely wild, and Lord Ethan put a hand on my shoulder and steered me forward. I looked up at the Duchess, and she smiled down at me, wearing a mask of royalty, and then she winked too, which was rather less royal of her. Did they even need Mona in the end? Yeah, they used her bread golems and her gingerbread men to hold people back. And then I would assume that Spindle was able to get Molly there because he was like, she's there. So, yeah, yeah, but Molly could have done it all on her own. Huh. She put something over my head. It was a round disc with sheaves of wheat stamped on it. That's the silver sheaf, the highest honor in our city gives out for exceptional valor. There was another one, which she pinned to my chest, which had a golden lion on it for extraordinary service to the crown, and then there was another one on a pin, which looked like an extremely ugly bronze cow folded into a little square, for courage under fire. The crowd roared for each one. I closed my eyes and thought very firmly about muffins. It pleases us to recognize the service and exceptional courage of one of our youngest citizens. Henceforth, let it be known that Mona, Wizard of the Bakery, is appointed a royal wizard with all the ranks and privileges thereof. A royal wizard? Like Master Gillidan and Lord Ethan? I gulped. And for you, little friend, said the Duchess. For a second, I didn't know who she was talking to, and then, on a very small ribbon, she pulled out a medal that looked like a silver sheaf, only about half the size of a penny. She placed it around the neck of the gingerbread man. You haven't lived until you've seen this cookie look smug. Turn around, murmured the Duchess. Count to 5 and then step to your left. We'll get Spindle up here, and then you can both leave. Lucky you. It occurred to me that the Duchess probably hated these ceremonies almost as much as I did. At least I only had to do it once, no matter what the Golden General said. I turned around. The crowd cheered so loudly that it was no longer sounded like voices. And I'll tell you, just for 1 minute there, it would I bought into it a little. My city, right there. I almost forgot to count. Two, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Spindle came up. He got the lion and the folded cow in a bronze sheaf for slightly less extraordinary service to the crown. He didn't seem to mind. The crowd cheered for him too, and Jenny blew kisses from behind Argonal. And then the cheering faded, and Harold, who had been standing on the far side of the stage, beckoned, and we walked down the dais and through the doors, and were finally allowed to go home for good. Things do go back to normal eventually. Joshua comes in sometimes for muffins once or twice, and I've been up to the palace to have tea with the Duchess. It's awkward. Not so much because she's the Duchess, but because after everything was over, I realized that I was still angry at her for not being braver or smarter or more something. When you're in charge of a whole city, you're responsible. It shouldn't be up to a couple of kids and a madwoman on a bone horse to fix the mess that you allowed to happen. But then I go to have tea and I look at her and I don't know if she really could have fixed it. She's only in charge because she inherited the city the same way that I'll inherit the bakery, and I think maybe she's not as good at ruling as I am at baking. And then I don't know what to think or who to be mad at anymore. I did hear that Jenny had something gone a bit odd in the palace kitchen. Something keeps knocking over the pepper shakers and putting salt in the sugar bowl. One night it tied all of the aprons in place together and hung them on the roasting pit. I think it might be one of the bad cookies. I thought I pulled all of the magic out, but it was a frantic time and maybe one squeaked by. One of these days, I'll go to that kitchen and I'll get to the bottom of things, if the cook asks me nicely. As for me, I work at the bakery, and I'm glad to do it. Sometimes people come in and see the medals and talk to one of the heroes of the Dead Horse War, but more often they come in for muffins and scones and gingerbread cookies, and we still have the best sourdough in the city, even though Bob's experience in battle has made him extra rambunctious, and we have to feed him on the end of a pole. Sometimes he dissolves the pole. Uncle Albert won't even go in the cellar now. My own special gingerbread cookie is still with me. He stands guard on the shelf of the bakery counter and keeps a careful eye on the customers. Oberon and Spring Green Man may be gone, but still, you never know. The Golden General took me aside a few days after the battle, and I told him that Master Gildeon had said what he had said about him, and he laughed. "It's all true," he said. He didn't look nearly as much of a young sun god in his office with his boots up on the desk. "I really couldn't hold off the army by myself. You, though," his eyes were fixed on my face. "You did, for quite a long time. An hour or two. An hour in battle is an eternity," said Lord Ethan. He took his feet off the desk and leaned forward. "You need to be trained. Magic like that is too powerful to waste." "I don't want to end up like Molly," I said. "A government wizard," she'd have called Lord Ethan. "No good for the likes of you and me." And yet, and yet, the Golden General, hero of the realm. Ethan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Poor woman. Power like that. Well, I wasn't even a raw recruit when she first went into battle, and I shuddered to think of how they mishandled her. We failed her. I want to make sure we don't fail you. I mean, you're bringing a 14-year-old into active war, and she just saw a bunch of bodies and created a bunch of bodies, and you're just like, let's do more of this. I don't know. I don't know. She doesn't seem too bothered, though, so I guess it's probably fine. I stared down at my hands. "I meant what I said at the ceremony, you know," he said. When I looked up, he had a rueful smile, the smile that you gave a friend or a colleague, not a little girl, not a little kid. "Heroism is a bad habit. Once you've done it, other people start to expect it. If the city's in danger again, everybody will remember that you saved them last time, and you'll forget all of the nasty, exhausting bits where you nearly died and had to sleep for a week, and your headache didn't go away for 3 days." "It was only 2 days," I mumbled. The headache in question had hit me like a ton of bricks on the walk in the battlefield. Joshua actually carried me to bed. Apparently that's normal with magic when you really, really overdo it. "Well, you're young. If I tried magic like that now, I'd have to hope it killed me because recuperating from it would be worse." I snorted. "Come up to the palace when you can," he said kindly. "We'll give you some training, and you might find it useful. We're not going to drag you off. If we tried, your aunt would have something to say, and Lord, I'd much rather face the Carricks." He shuddered theatrically, and I had to laugh. But it didn't last long. "The Duchess," I began, without knowing even what I wanted to say. Yes. If she'd just stopped Oberon, I cried. I felt like something bad building in my chest since knackering Molly died. I wanted to scream or weep or rage or something. Something to make sense of it all. Why didn't she stop it? Why didn't anyone stop it? His eyes flicked to the door, and I think that he was making sure that it was closed and that no one was listening. It occurred to me that what I had just said might be treason, and of course, I had said it to the man in charge of the army. Maybe his next words were going to be to tell me to shut up or to be thrown in the dungeon. And instead, he said, I know. I put my head on my hands and stared at the floor. The carpet had a pattern of interlocking lightning bolts. The golden general sighed. I'd been exactly where you are. But what can we do? You can't put the military in charge of the city. We're useful servants but terrible masters. And if I took it in my head to declare myself a wizard emperor like Elgar dreamed of doing, well, I hope like hell someone would stop me. But if you're not going to be a bad person, why would you want somebody to stop you? Just be like, I can run this. They were just like, oh, the Duchess is in over her head and she doesn't have the know how to do this. Okay, so replace her. Become a cookie lich. We met each other's eyes, and then we both looked away. After a minute, I said, I never wanted to be a hero. His face was solemn. Nobody ever does. Probably I will go up to the palace and learn at least a few things. There's a lot of concepts and spiraling shadows I still don't understand, and the general was right about one thing. Nobody was going to forget who saved them. You never know when somebody is going to need you to defend the city, but learning as far as I'm willing to go. But learning is as far as I'm willing to go. Molly was right too. People in power can crush you like a bug. I don't want to be crushed, and I don't want to be in a position to crush anyone else. At the moment, though, all I want to do is make muffins and bread and learn to be the best baker in the city. Magic is exhausting. So, if you ever happen to be passing down Market Street before you get to the Rat Elbow, take a turn into the Wallfish Street and go down about half a block and you'll find yourself at the very best bakery in the city. And if I'm in a good mood and you ask nicely, I might even make a gingerbread man get up and dance. And that is the end. We have made it, folks. We have made it. Also, this is the author that is writing the book for Asterion, just so you know. She also wrote The Diviners. What? Did you not see that it said T Kingfisher on it? I mean, I don't know how well her others. I don't know how well her other stuff goes. I think The Diviners is pretty popular. You were close to passing out. Yeah. That was something. That was something. This still has a 4 out of 4.05. Uh, oops, I scrolled way too far to see her other book. Sorry. You can't see what I'm looking at, but Nettle and Bone, what moves the dead? Never mind. She didn't. I thought she did the Diviners. Who am I thinking of? Was it Libby? Maybe it was Libby Bray. I'm thinking it might be Libby Bray. It probably was Libby Bray. I'm gonna be real with you. But Nettle and Bone is her most popular, with a 4.7. It's listed as horror, magic, fantasy, witches, fairy tales. Julian Gray liked it. Anyway, what we gonna do now? We are gonna end now. We're gonna go and relax, and I'm gonna put up the next reading poll. And Oh, just read this one, just read the sample for Asterion later. Or, better yet, let Neil read it to you, because it might be better than you're expecting, okay? Give it a chance. The vaguely absurd pen name of Ursula Vernon. Ursula Vernon, right? Oh, that's her comic books, children's comic books page. Okay, anyway. Good night, everybody. Enjoy. Night. Have a good one and don't die.